In a galaxy far, far away, where stars burn cold against the void and planets spin through endless night, winter comes in forms both familiar and strange. The force itself seems to breathe differently in the darkest seasons, when light withdraws and shadows lengthen across 1,000 worlds. These are tales of cold nights and warm hearts, of solitude and fellowship, of darkness that makes the light shine brighter. Let yourself settle in, relax your breathing, and drift through stories of winter across the stars. The first snowfall on Hoth, long before the Rebel Alliance carved Echo Base from its frozen heart, long before At walkers stalked across white plains leaving massive footprints in virgin snow, the ice planet Hoth spun silently through space in the Anahuac sector of the Outer Rim territories. The planet was old, ancient even by galactic standards, and it held secrets locked beneath kilometers of ice that had accumulated over countless millennia. The planet orbited its pale sun at just the wrong distance, not close enough to sustain liquid water on its surface, not far enough to freeze solid into a lifeless ball of ice. Instead, Hoth existed in that cruel middle ground where life could cling to existence, but only barely. The planet had not always been locked in its perpetual winter. Geological surveys conducted thousands of years after the first explorers arrived would reveal evidence of warmer periods, times when Hoth's eccentric orbit brought it closer to its star and the ice retreated, revealing rocky ground beneath. The first beings to discover Hoth during one of its warmer interglacial periods found a world caught between states. They were explorers from the Old Republic during the Golden Age when hyperlanes were still being mapped and every jump into hyperspace might reveal wonders. Their ship, the Distant Horizon, dropped out of light speed in the Hoth system purely by chance. A miscalculation in their nav computer, or perhaps the will of the Force guiding them to something they needed to see. Captain Valora Than stood on the bridge of her exploration vessel and watched the blue-white sphere grow larger in the viewport. Ice and snow covered most of the visible surface, but there, along the equatorial band, she could see exposed rock. Mountain ranges pierced through the glacial sheets like the bones of some impossibly massive creature. Her science officer, a methodical Ithorian named Dommel, ran spectral analysis after spectral analysis, barely believing his instruments. "The ice is retreating," he said, his twin mouths speaking in harmony. "This world is emerging from a deep freeze. Look at these readings from the equatorial regions. I'm detecting liquid water, Captain. Not much, but it's there. Thermal vents beneath the ice sheets. Volcanic activity keeping small pockets warm enough for water to exist." They descended through Hoth's thin atmosphere, their ship's sensors recording everything. The planet had 3 moons, each small and irregularly shaped, probably captured asteroids from the debris field that ringed the outer system. These moons pulled at Hoth's ice sheets, creating tidal stresses that cracked the surface into massive pressure ridges and deep crevasses. Jets of water vapor erupted periodically from these fissures, freezing almost instantly in the frigid air and creating towering spires of ice that caught the weak sunlight and refracted it into rainbow displays visible for kilometers. The crew of the Distant Horizon landed in a relatively flat area near the equator, where the ice was thinner and rocky ground was visible in patches. The wind hit them like a physical force when they emerged from the ship. Even through their environmental suits, they could feel the cold, a penetrating chill that seemed to reach past insulation and heating elements to touch something primal inside them. -32 degrees standard, Valora's co-pilot reported, reading from his wrist display. And that's in the middle of what passes for daytime here. The sun barely rises above the horizon. This planet spins on its axis with extreme axial tilt. We're looking at a world where the poles never see the sun for half the year, and even the equator only gets weak, angled sunlight. But it was beautiful in its own way. The ice field stretched to the horizon, an endless expanse of white, broken only by those towering ice spires and the occasional jutting rock formation. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue during the day, but as Hoth's sun began its shallow arc toward the horizon, the sky transformed. Colors emerged that Valora had never seen in nature before, purples and deep blues, oranges and reds that seemed too vivid to be real. The ice spires caught this light and amplified it, turning the landscape into a cathedral of frozen color. "I'm picking up life signs," Dommel said suddenly, his dual voices tight with excitement. "Something large, multiple somethings. They're moving beneath the surface. No, wait, they're emerging." From a crevasse 100 meters away, something white and massive pulled itself onto the surface. The creature stood at least 3 meters tall, covered in shaggy white fur that blended perfectly with the snow. It moved on 2 powerful legs, its arms long and equipped with curved claws that looked capable of rending metal. A pair of small horns jutted from its skull, and its face was almost simian, with a flat nose and eyes that reflected the dying light with an eerie intelligence. "A wampa," Valora breathed, though of course she didn't know that name yet. The explorers would catalog the creature, classify it, add it to the growing database of known species across the galaxy. But in that moment, watching it move across the ice with surprising grace for something so large, all she could think was how perfectly adapted it was to this frozen hell. The wampa stopped and turned its massive head toward the ship. For a moment, predator and explorers regarded each other across the ice. Then the creature dropped to all fours and bounded away, disappearing into a labyrinth of ice caves that honeycomb the equatorial region. The crew spent 3 standard days on Hoth during that first visit. They cataloged dozens of species, all of them adapted to the extreme cold. The tauntauns, those smaller bipedal lizards that could somehow survive in temperatures that would kill most carbon-based life forms within minutes. The ice worms, annelids, that carved their way through the ice spires to feed on frozen algae suspended in the ice. Even microscopic life, bacteria, and simple plants that had evolved to produce their own antifreeze, allowing them to remain active even when the temperature plunged to 60 below during the long nights. "This planet has a complex ecosystem," Dommel reported as they prepared to leave. "More complex than we initially thought. There are predators and prey, plants and microorganisms, all of them locked in intricate relationships. The wampas hunt the tauntauns, but they also compete with other predators we've observed. Those dragon slugs in the deeper caves, for instance. They breathe fire, Captain, actual fire. We watched one char a chunk of ice and then eat the melted water and any organic matter suspended in it. But what fascinated Valora most was something Dommel discovered on their last day on the surface. Deep scans of the ice sheet revealed something unexpected. Structures, artificial structures buried beneath hundreds of meters of ice. They were old, ancient even, possibly predating the current ice age. Some previous civilization had existed on Hoth, had built cities, and lived lives under warmer skies. Then the ice had come, slowly at first, then with accelerating speed as Hoth's orbit shifted and the planet plunged into deep freeze. Those people, whoever they were, had either fled or died. Their cities were now tombs of ice, monuments to the impermanence of everything. "Mark these coordinates," Valora ordered. "This world isn't just an ice ball. It has history, secrets. Someday, someone might find those ruins valuable, or at least interesting." She was right, of course, though she would never know it. Thousands of years later, the Rebel Alliance would choose Hoth as the site for their base precisely because it was so desolate, so inhospitable, so unlikely to harbor any Imperial presence. They would carve their base into the same ice that had swallowed those ancient cities, never knowing they walked above the graves of a forgotten people. The distant horizon jumped back into hyperspace, leaving Hoth to its solitude. The planet continued its slow orbit, its ice sheets advancing and retreating in cycles that lasted millennia. The Wampas hunted and bred in their ice caves. The Tauntauns migrated across the frozen plains in herds, following the scent of lichen that grew in the brief spring thaws. Life continued, harsh and unforgiving, but persistent. Centuries passed. Hoth appeared on some star charts as an interesting curiosity, a world of ice in the outer rim. Smugglers occasionally used the asteroid field that surrounded the planet as a hiding place, jumping their ships into the debris field to avoid pursuit before jumping back out. A few of these smugglers tried to establish bases on the planet's surface, thinking the extreme conditions would keep them safe from competitors or law enforcement. None of these attempts lasted long. The cold and the Wampas saw to that. Then came the Clone Wars, and Hoth's isolation became absolute. With hyperspace travel restricted and military forces focused on the conflict between the Republic and the Separatists, entire sectors of space went unexplored or unmapped. Hoth faded from memory, becoming one of countless ice worlds in a galaxy full of more pressing concerns. The Wampas, of course, knew nothing of wars between distant stars. They knew only the eternal rhythms of their world. The long, dark periods when they retreated to their deepest caves and entered a state of torpor, conserving energy. The brief warming periods when they emerged, hungry and aggressive, to hunt the Tauntaun herds. They lived in loose clan structures, not quite intelligent, but possessing a cunning that allowed them to cooperate in taking down larger prey. One particular Wampa clan made its home in a system of ice caves near what would later become the site of Echo Base. The matriarch of this clan was massive, even by Wampa standards, with white fur streaked through with gray that indicated her advanced age. She had survived countless winters, had born and raised multiple generations of cubs. The other Wampas in the clan deferred to her, recognizing her experience and strength. During the deepest part of the winter cycle, when the temperature plunged to -60 and the wind screamed across the ice with enough force to strip flesh from bone, the matriarch would lead her clan deep into the cave system. They would curl together in the largest chamber, a natural cavern worn smooth by ancient water flow, back when Hoth had been warm enough for liquid water to exist on the surface. The Wampas would share body heat, their dense fur and thick layers of fat, insulating them against the cold that would kill any lesser creature. But even in these moments of relative comfort, the matriarch remained alert. She had learned through hard experience that winter on Hoth was when the most dangerous predators emerged. The dragon slugs would slither up from the deepest caves, drawn by the warmth of sleeping wampas. Silent and deadly, they could breathe gouts of flame hot enough to melt ice and cook flesh. The matriarch had scars on her back from a dragon slug encounter years ago, and she bore the memory of losing 2 cubs to the creature's fire. So even as she appeared to sleep, curled with her clan in the depths of the ice, part of her remained conscious, listening, sensing, ready to react to any threat. Above the sleeping wampus, the ice continued its slow work. New snow fell, layer upon layer, compressing the snow beneath into ice. The weight of this accumulated ice created immense pressure at the deeper levels, pressure that slowly squeezed out air bubbles and created the clear, blue-tinted ice that made Hoth so visually distinctive from orbit. This process had been ongoing for millennia, each winter adding another thin layer, building up the ice sheets to their current thickness of several kilometers in some places. The ice also created the cave systems that riddled Hoth's crust. Water vapor from volcanic vents would rise through cracks in the rock, freezing as it went, but also melting ice around it. Over thousands of years, this process carved out vast networks of tunnels and chambers. Some of these caves were small, barely large enough for a single wampa. Others were enormous, cathedral-like spaces where the ice had melted and refrozen into fantastic shapes. Stalactites and stalagmites of clear ice, columns where the two had merged, delicate ice flowers that grew from the walls in fractal patterns. These caves became the archives of Hoth's history. Air bubbles trapped in the ice preserved samples of ancient atmospheres. Frozen microorganisms provided glimpses of ecosystems that had existed during warmer periods. The ice itself was a timeline, each layer representing a year or a decade or a century, depending on the depth. Future xenobiologists would look at ice core samples from Hoth and read the planet's history like a book written in frozen water. But none of this mattered to the wampas sleeping in their cave, or the tauntauns huddled together on the surface, or the ice worms frozen in their spires waiting for the brief spring thaw. They lived in the eternal now of animal existence, responding to immediate needs and instincts honed over millions of years of evolution. They knew nothing of the galaxy beyond their frozen world, nothing of the Republic or the Clone Wars or the Empire that would soon rise to dominate known space. Spring, such as it was on Hoth, eventually came. The planet's orbit brought it fractionally closer to its sun, and temperatures rose to merely brutal levels instead of lethal. The ice on the surface softened slightly, and in some equatorial regions, small pools of liquid water appeared during the brief midday hours before freezing solid again at night. This was the signal the wampas had been waiting for. They emerged from their caves, blinking in the weak sunlight, their fur matted and their bodies thin from the long fast of winter. The first order of business was hunting. The tauntaun herds had also survived the winter, protected by their remarkable metabolism that allowed them to maintain body temperature even in extreme cold. They emerged from their own shelters, natural windbreaks formed by ice ridges and rock outcroppings, and began grazing on the lichen that grew on exposed rocks and in the upper layers of ice. The lichen was blue-green, another example of life adapted to impossibility. It photosynthesized during the brief periods of sunlight, growing slowly but steadily. The matriarch Wampa watched a tauntaun herd from the concealment of an ice spire. Her clan spread out around her, each Wampa taking position according to a plan that existed more as shared instinct than conscious strategy. The tauntauns were wary, their large eyes constantly scanning for threats, but they were also hungry, driven to graze while food was available. The matriarch waited, patient, knowing that opportunity would present itself. And it did. One tauntaun, a younger male, strayed too far from the herd. The matriarch charged, her powerful legs propelling her across the ice with surprising speed. The tauntaun saw her coming and bolted, but the Wampa had timed her attack perfectly. She cut off the tauntaun's escape route, driving it toward where her clan waited in ambush. A Sith Lord solstice on Korriban, the Valley of the Dark Lords, lay silent beneath Korriban's blood-red sky. Twin moons hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows from the ancient tombs that lined the valley floor. The wind whispered through the carved facades of these monuments, creating sounds that might have been voices or might have been nothing more than air moving through hollow spaces. It was the night of the winter solstice, the longest night of the year on this dead world, and in the depths of the Sith Academy, preparations were underway for a ritual as old as the Sith themselves. Darth Vexar stood at the window of his meditation chamber, watching the moons rise. He was not a powerful Sith Lord by the standards of the great Dark Lords who had come before him. He would never be a Dark Lord, never command armies, or reshape the galaxy to his will. But he was skilled in certain areas, particularly in the ancient rituals that most modern Sith had forgotten or dismissed as superstition. And tonight, on the longest night, those skills would be put to use. The winter solstice held special meaning for the Sith. On most worlds, it was celebrated as a time of hope, a recognition that the days would begin growing longer, that light would return. But the Sith had always understood that darkness was not something to be feared or endured, but embraced. For them, the longest night was the most sacred, the time when the dark side of the Force was strongest, when the barriers between the living and the dead grew thin. Korriban's winter was not like winter on other worlds. The planet sat close to its red dwarf star, and temperatures varied little throughout the year, but there were cycles, subtle shifts in climate that ancient Sith astronomers had mapped with precision. The winter solstice marked the point when Korriban was farthest from its sun in its slightly elliptical orbit. The red light that bathed the planet year-round became slightly dimmer. The already cool temperatures dropped a few degrees, and the wind that blew constantly across the barren wastes took on a sharper edge. Vexar had spent weeks preparing for this night. The ritual he intended to perform required specific conditions, specific materials, and above all, specific timing. The alignment of the moons, the position of the planet in its orbit, the configuration of certain stars visible from Korriban's surface. All had to be precise. The ancient texts were clear on this point. Perform the ritual at the wrong time, and at best, nothing would happen. At worst, the energies invoked might destroy the ritualist or drive him mad. He turned from the window and moved to the center of his chamber. The room was austere, as befitted a Sith who had dedicated his life to study rather than conquest. Stone walls, bare of decoration except for a few ancient Sith inscriptions carved into the rock. A single brazier provided light and heat, though Vexar needed neither. He had learned to regulate his body temperature through the Force, to see in darkness, using senses beyond the physical. The materials for the ritual lay arranged on the floor in a precise, geometric pattern. Candles made from rendered bantha fat, placed at each point of a five-pointed star. Crystals harvested from the depths of Korriban's ancient caves, each one naturally attuned to the dark side. Powdered bone from a long-dead Sith Lord, ground fine and mixed with sand from the Valley of the Dark Lords. And in the center, a kyber crystal, bleeding red from its corruption by the dark side. Vexar lowered himself to sit cross-legged in the center of the pattern. He closed his eyes and began to breathe, slow and measured. The first step in any Sith ritual was achieving the correct mental state. Not the rage that fueled a Sith warrior in combat, not the cold calculation that allowed a Sith manipulator to bend others to their will. This required something different, a kind of negative peace, a state of mind where the ritualist became a void, a hollow channel through which dark side energy could flow. The technique had taken him years to master. Most Sith never learned it because it required surrendering control, something that went against every instinct of beings who sought to dominate the Force rather than serve it. But Vexar had understood early in his training that true power sometimes came from yielding, from allowing the Force to move through you rather than trying to bend it to your will. His breathing slowed further. He became aware of the Force flowing around him, through him. The dark side was strong here, saturated into the very stones of Korriban by millennia of Sith presence. He could feel the echoes of thousands of dark rituals, thousands of apprentices who had trained in these chambers, thousands of deaths in the tombs outside. The dark side remembered everything, recorded every act of anger, fear, hatred. Korriban was a library of darkness, and Vexar was about to open a very old, very dangerous book. He began the incantation. The words were Old Sith, a language so ancient that even most scholars of Sith history could barely translate it. Vexar had spent a decade learning the language, not just the words, but the proper pronunciation, the rhythm and cadence that turned mere sounds into a conduit for dark side power. Each syllable resonated with the Force, creating ripples in the fabric of reality. The candles ignited spontaneously, their flames burning with an unnatural steadiness despite the draft in the chamber. The crystals began to glow, each one pulsing in time with Vexar's heartbeat. The powdered bone stirred, moving in slow spirals as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. And the kyber crystal at the center began to hum, a sound felt more than heard, vibrating at a frequency that made Vexar's teeth ache. Outside, in the Valley of the Dark Lords, the dead began to stir. The first sign was subtle, shadows that moved independently of the moons, shapes that flickered at the edge of vision, there one moment and gone the next. Then, more obviously, lights appeared in the tombs, blue-green ghost lights that floated through solid stone, emerging from the sealed entrances of monuments that had been closed for millennia. These were not true ghosts, not the Force spirits that powerful Jedi or Sith sometimes became after death. These were echoes, impressions left in the Forest by beings of immense power, The ancient Sith lords buried in the valley had been strong enough in life that something of them remained, not conscious exactly, but aware in a limited, dreamlike way. Most of the year, these echoes slept, dormant and harmless. But on nights like this, when the barriers between worlds grew thin and a skilled ritualist called to them, they could manifest. Vexar felt their presence in his chamber. Ajuntapal, the first Dark Lord, whose tomb was the oldest and largest in the valley. Tulak Horde, whose skill with a lightsaber had never been matched. Marka Ragnos, who had ruled the Sith Empire for over a century. Naga Sadow, who had led the first great war against the Republic. Dozens of others, each one a legend, each one a monster by most standards. They gathered around him, not quite visible, not quite real, existing in that liminal space between physical and spiritual. Vexar could feel their scrutiny, their ancient and alien thought processes, trying to comprehend why they had been summoned. Some were hostile, remembering the night of their deaths and seeing any living Sith as a potential threat or usurper. Others were merely curious, drawn by the resonance of the ritual like moths to flame. Vexar did not try to control them or command them. That would have been foolish and fatal. Instead, he made offerings. The candles and crystals were gifts, sources of light and force energy that the echoes could consume, sustaining themselves for a few precious hours of quasi-existence. The bone powder was a reminder of what they had been, a connection to the physical world they no longer inhabited. Knowledge flowed into Vexar's mind, not as words or images, but as pure understanding, techniques for manipulating the force that had been lost for centuries. Rituals even more complex than the one he was currently performing. The locations of hidden caches of Sith artifacts scattered across the galaxy. The true names of ancient Sith weapons, the speaking of which could awaken dormant powers in seemingly mundane objects. Some of this knowledge was dangerous. Formulas for alchemical creations that should never be brought into being. Spells that could shatter minds or corrupt entire ecosystems. The echoes did not care about the consequences of what they taught. They were fragments of beings who had embraced darkness so completely that concepts like restraint or caution no longer applied to them. Vexar accepted it all, storing the knowledge in compartments of his mind that he would examine later, carefully, with all the protections he could muster. Some of what the echoes taught him he would never use. Some of it he would study for years before attempting. And some of it, the truly revolutionary insights, would eventually change his understanding of the Force itself. Hours passed. The moons tracked across the sky, approaching the zenith that marked true midnight. The power flowing through the ritual intensified, building toward some crescendo that Vexar could sense but not quite predict. The kyber crystal at the center of the pattern glowed brighter and brighter, its red light filling the chamber and spilling out the window to paint the valley outside in bloody illumination. At midnight exactly, something shifted. The echoes of the ancient Sith lords suddenly became more solid, more present. For just a moment, perhaps a dozen heartbeats, they were truly there, manifested fully in Vexar's chamber. He could see them clearly now, each one appearing as they had in life. Warriors in ancient armor, sorcerers in robed regalia, beings of dozens of different species, united by their embrace of the dark side. They spoke, their voices layered and echoing, speaking in unison words that Vexar's rational mind could barely process. The darkness is eternal. The light is temporary. We are what was and what will be. Remember us. Continue us. Become us. Then, as quickly as they had fully manifested, they faded. The power building and the ritual released all at once in a pulse of dark side energy that radiated out from Vexar's chamber in all directions. Every force sensitive within 100 kilometers felt it, a wave of cold darkness that passed through them like a ghost's touch. In the Sith Academy, apprentices woke from nightmares they couldn't remember. In the valley, creatures that prowled the tombs fled in terror from something they couldn't name. And Vexar collapsed, the ritual complete, his mind reeling from the contact with something so ancient and powerful. He lay on the cold stone floor of his chamber, gasping as the candles guttered out and the crystals went dark. The kyber crystal at the center of the pattern had cracked, its internal structure unable to withstand the surge of dark side energy that had flowed through it. It was a small price to pay for what he had gained. As consciousness slowly returned, Vexar became aware of someone else in his chamber. A living presence, not one of the echoes. He forced his eyes open and saw a figure standing in the doorway. A younger Sith, an apprentice named Korath, who had served as Vexar's assistant in preparing the ritual. "The whole Academy felt it, Master," Korath said, his voice filled with equal parts awe and fear. "Every Sith, every slave, every beast. What did you do?" Vexar managed to pull himself to his feet, though his legs were unsteady. "I remembered," he said. "On the longest night, when darkness is strongest, I remembered what we once were, what we could be again." He moved to the window and looked out at the Valley of the Dark Lords. The ghost lights had faded. The tombs were dark and silent once more, but he knew that something had changed. The ancient Sith Lords had heard his call and answered, and in answering, they had given him tools that could reshape the future of the Order. "This is the purpose of the winter solstice for us," Vexar continued, more to himself than to Korath. "Not a celebration of light's return, but a recognition of darkness's power. In the deepest dark, when all seems lost, that is when we are strongest. That is when we reach across the void and touch eternity. Tatooine's cold desert nights. Most beings who had never visited Tatooine imagined it as a world of unending, crushing heat. Twin suns burning overhead, sand so hot it could cook flesh, air shimmering with heat haze from horizon to horizon. And during the day, in the peaks of summer, this was largely accurate. Daytime temperatures could soar to 54 degrees Celsius or higher, hot enough that even the hardy Tusken raiders retreated to the depths of their caves, and moisture farmers sealed their homesteads against the merciless radiation. But Tatooine had another face, one that only those who actually lived on the desert world truly knew. When the twin suns set, when Tatooine followed Tatoo 2 below the horizon and darkness finally claimed the endless dunes, the temperature plummeted. Desert worlds, lacking significant water vapor in their atmospheres or substantial vegetation to retain heat, cool rapidly once solar radiation stops. On Tatooine, this effect was extreme. Within an hour of sunset, the temperature could drop from 50 degrees to near freezing. By the depths of night, it was not uncommon for frost to form on exposed metal and for water left outside to freeze solid. It was during one of these cold desert nights that Garen Veer made a discovery that would change his understanding of his homeworld forever. Garin was a moisture farmer, third generation, his family having worked the same parcel of desert for nearly 80 years. The farm was located in the wastes, far from major settlements like Mos Eisley or Mos Espa, which meant that when something went wrong with equipment, there was no one to call for help. You fixed it yourself, or you died. On this particular night, one of Garin's primary evaporators had stopped functioning. This was serious. The evaporator pulled what little water vapor existed in Tatooine's atmosphere and condensed it into liquid water, which was then stored in underground tanks. Lose one evaporator and a farm could survive, though profits would suffer. Lose more than one and the farm became unprofitable, forcing the family to either take on debt or abandon the land. So, when Garin's monitoring system alerted him to the malfunction in the middle of the night, he had no choice but to go out and fix it. He suited up in the heavy cold weather gear that most off-worlders would find bizarre for a desert planet. Insulated jacket, thermal gloves, goggles to protect his eyes not from sand, but from the biting wind that rose after sunset. Outside the homestead, the temperature had already dropped below freezing. His breath misted in the air, each exhalation a small cloud of water vapor that froze into tiny ice crystals before dispersing. The evaporator was located about 2 kilometers from the main homestead, far enough that Garin took his land speeder rather than walk. The speeder's engine had been modified to handle the extreme temperature swings of Tatooine, but even so, it took several tries before it turned over. Machines, like people, suffered in this climate. Metal contracted in the cold, lubricants thickened, seals became brittle. Tatooine was hard on everything. The journey to the evaporator was surreal. The same dunes that glowed golden white under the twin suns appeared silver in the starlight, transformed into an alien landscape that Garin barely recognized despite having crossed this stretch of desert hundreds of times. The moons were both below the horizon, leaving only the stars to provide illumination. But oh, what stars! Without the light pollution of cities or the scattering effect of a thick atmosphere, Tatooine's night sky was a spectacular display of light. The galactic core was visible as a band of dense stars stretching from horizon to horizon. Individual constellations were lost in the sheer number of stars, the sky more white than black in places. Garin had always loved the night sky, the one compensation for living on this harsh world. During the day, Tatooine felt small and claustrophobic, the desert stretching to every horizon, but ultimately finite and knowable. But at night, looking up at those countless stars, he could imagine himself part of something vast and infinite. Somewhere up there were the core worlds, Coruscant and its trillion inhabitants. Somewhere were the green worlds he'd seen in holovids, planets with rain and rivers and oceans. Worlds where water was abundant rather than precious, where life thrived instead of merely surviving. The malfunctioning evaporator came into view, its tower silhouette black against the stars. Garin brought the land speeder to a stop and climbed out, toolkit in hand. The problem was immediately obvious. One of the primary collection fins had broken free in the wind and was dangling by a single bolt. The wind had bent the fin out of alignment, which had thrown off the delicate balance of the entire collection array. Simple to fix if he could manage it in the cold with numbing fingers. He set to work, his movements practiced despite the cold. Remove the damaged fin, retrieve a replacement from the storage compartment in the evaporator's base, install, and calibrate. Routine maintenance that he'd performed dozens of times. But as he worked, something caught his attention: movement in the dunes to the north. His first thought was Tuscan raiders, and his hand moved instinctively to the blaster pistol at his belt. But it wasn't raiders. The shapes moving across the dunes were too large, too numerous. As they drew closer, Garen realized he was seeing a bantha herd, maybe 20 or 30 of the massive creatures moving through the night in a loose column. He had never seen banthas at night before. The creatures were typically diurnal, resting during the night in whatever shelter they could find. But here they were, traveling purposefully through the cold darkness. The herd passed within 50 meters of the evaporator, and Garen got a good look at them. The banthas were larger than he'd realized, their shaggy coats thick with the special winter growth that protected them from the nighttime cold. They moved with surprising grace despite their bulk, their broad feet distributing their weight across the sand so they barely sank. The lead bantha, a massive male with curling horns, paused and looked directly at Garen. For a moment, human and beast regarded each other across the frozen desert. Then the bantha snorted, its breath a great cloud of steam, and continued on its way. Curious now, Garen abandoned his work on the evaporator and climbed to the top of the tower using the maintenance ladder built into the structure. From 15 meters up, he could see for kilometers in every direction, and what he saw amazed him. The desert was not empty, far from it. Everywhere he looked, he could see life. Bantha herds moving between feeding grounds, dewbacks, those massive lizards, prowling for prey, their natural infrared vision making them formidable hunters even in total darkness. Smaller creatures, too. Sand mice and womp rats emerging from burrows, taking advantage of the cooler temperatures to forage without risk of heat stroke. Even the plants, the few hardy succulents and grasses that managed to survive in this environment, seemed more active at night, their root systems drawing moisture from the cooler sand. Tatooine, it turned out, was not a dead world. It was a nocturnal world. Most of its native life had adapted to survive the brutal days by hiding and becoming active only at night. The cold that sent moisture farmers scrambling for heated shelters was mild compared to daytime heat. Life thrived in these dark hours, following rhythms as old as the planet itself. Garen sat on the platform at the top of the evaporator and watched the desert come alive around him. In the distance, he saw lights, not the harsh white lights of settlements, but softer, warmer glows. Campfires, the Tuscan raiders, those enigmatic natives of Tatooine, also preferred the night. Their camps dotted the desert, small clusters of light in the darkness. Garen had always thought of the raiders as savages, violent and primitive. But looking at their camps now, seeing the organized way they moved through the night, he wondered if perhaps they understood something about Tatooine that the human colonists had missed. The Tuscans had been here for thousands of years, long before humans arrived seeking mining opportunities that never materialized. They had adapted to this world in ways humans never could, developing culture and tradition suited to desert life. Their practice of covering every bit of skin, which human settlers did to protect from heat and UV radiation during the day, the Tuscans did for different reasons. Their wrappings trapped moisture allowed them to reclaim water from their own breath and sweat. They were, in their own way, living vaporators, adapted to extreme efficiency in water usage, and they celebrated the night. Garin knew this from stories told by the few traders who had managed to establish peaceful relations with certain Tuscan tribes. The raiders had festivals during the coldest parts of the year, gatherings where multiple clans would come together in neutral territory. They would feast on bantha meat and share stories around massive bonfires. They would perform dances, ritual movements that honored the desert and the night sky. Some tribes practiced a form of astronomy, reading the stars not just for navigation, but as a kind of spiritual practice, seeing in the constellations the shapes of ancient Tuscan heroes and legends. From his vantage point, Garin could see one such gathering in the distance. 3 separate camps had merged into one larger configuration, their fires forming a pattern that might have been random or might have been significant. He was too far away to hear anything, but he imagined the sounds, the rhythmic beating of drums made from bantha hide, the haunting calls of the Tuscan language, those guttural barks and whistles that humans found so alien, the crackle of fire and the shuffle of feet on sand. The cold was becoming uncomfortable even through his insulated clothing. Garin climbed down from the vaporator and finished his repairs. The replacement fin locked into place, and he ran a quick diagnostic. The vaporator was operating normally again, its collection array already beginning to pull moisture from the frigid air. He packed his tools and climbed back into his land speeder. The Ice Moon Festival of Pantora. The ice moon of Pantora spun slowly around its host planet, a gas giant whose pale blue surface dominated half the moon's sky. The moon itself was a world of extremes, with temperatures that could flash freeze exposed flesh in seconds, and ice sheets kilometers thick covering most of the surface. Yet life had found a way, as it so often did. The Pantorans, the blue-skinned humanoids who called this moon home, had not only survived in this frozen realm, but had built a civilization that celebrated the ice rather than merely enduring it. Senator Rio Chuchi stood at the window of her childhood home in the capital city of Pantora, looking out at the preparations for the annual Ice Moon Festival. The city spread below her, a marvel of architecture designed specifically for the extreme cold. Buildings were constructed from blocks of ice that had been shaped and fused using ancient techniques passed down through generations. These weren't the cloudy, brittle ice blocks that might be found on other worlds, but clear, strong ice that had been compacted under immense pressure until it achieved a strength comparable to stone. The blocks were fitted together with such precision that no mortar was needed, and the finished structures had a translucent quality that made them glow from within when lit by the pale light of Pantora's gas giant parent. The festival preparations had been underway for weeks. Teams of artisans had carved intricate designs into the facades of public buildings, transforming functional architecture into elaborate works of art. The themes varied from building to building. Some featured scenes from Pantoran history, depicting the first settlers who had arrived on this frozen moon and learned to survive. Others showed mythological scenes, stories of ice spirits and ancient heroes that formed the foundation of Pantoran culture, and some were purely abstract, geometric patterns that caught and refracted light in mesmerizing ways. Rio watched as a team of workers installed the last of the festival lights. These were not electrical lights, but bioluminescent orbs harvested from the deep ice caves beneath the moon's surface. The orbs were actually colonies of microscopic organisms that glowed with a soft blue-white light when exposed to air. During the festival, thousands of these orbs would be placed throughout the city, creating an ethereal glow that transformed Pandora into something from a dream. "Rio!" Her mother's voice came from behind her. "You're going to be late for the opening ceremony." Rio turned from the window and smiled. Her mother, Jael Chuchi, was dressed in traditional festival garb. A flowing gown made from silk weave, a fabric produced by ice spiders that lived in the moon's polar regions. The gown was the deep blue color that Pantorans favored, decorated with silver thread that had been woven into intricate patterns representing Rio's clan and family. On her head, Jael wore a crown of ice crystals, each one carefully selected for its clarity and cut to catch the light. "I'm ready," Rio said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. This year would be different from past festivals. This year, as a senator representing Pandora in the Galactic Senate, she was expected to give the opening address. It was an honor, but also a responsibility that weighed heavily on her. They left the house together, joining the streams of Pantorans heading toward the festival grounds at the city center. The streets were crowded, but not chaotic. Pantorans moved through crowds with an efficiency born of living in close quarters on a small moon where every meter of habitable space was precious. The air was filled with sounds, music from ice flutes, instruments carved from solid ice that produced haunting, ethereal melodies when played, laughter and conversation in Pantoran, a language that sounded like wind chimes to non-native speakers. The crunch of footsteps on packed snow. The festival grounds were magnificent. A vast plaza had been cleared and decorated with ice sculptures depicting scenes from Pantoran mythology. At the center stood the ice tree, a massive sculpture carved from a single block of ice that had taken a team of master artisans an entire year to complete. The tree stood 20 meters tall, its branches spreading in all directions, each twig and leaf carved with such detail that they seemed almost real. Hidden within the structure were channels through which water was flowing, kept liquid by carefully controlled heating elements. This water caught the light and made the entire tree sparkle as if covered in dew. Gathered around the ice tree were what looked like thousands of Pantorans, but Rio knew the actual number was closer to 10,000. Nearly half the moon's population had come to witness the opening ceremony. She felt her stomach tighten with nerves. Speaking before the Senate on Coruscant had been intimidating, but this was her own people, and somehow that made it worse. She made her way through the crowd, her mother at her side, until she reached the raised platform that had been erected at the base of the ice tree. Other dignitaries were already there. Chairman Chicho, the leader of Pantoran government, dressed in formal robes that marked his office. The high priests of the ice temples, religious leaders who maintained the old traditions even as Pantora modernized and joined a wider galactic community. Representatives from major clans and families, each one important in their own way to the functioning of Pantoran society. Chairman Cho greeted Rio with a formal bow. "Senator Chuchi, We are honored by your presence and eager to hear your words. Rio returned the bow. The honor is mine, Chairman. Pantora is my home, and I am grateful for the opportunity to address my people. The ceremony began with the traditional blessing led by the high priests. They spoke in Old Pantoran, a formal version of the language used mainly for religious purposes. Rio understood it only partially, having studied it in school but never used it in daily life. The blessing called upon the ancient spirits of ice and cold to favor the gathering, to bring prosperity and health to all Pantorans in the coming year. It asked for harmony within the clans and peace with the wider galaxy. After the blessing came the lighting of the ice tree. This was always the emotional high point of the ceremony. Thousands of the bioluminescent orbs had been placed within the tree's structure, and as the high priests completed their blessing, these orbs were exposed to air, causing them to begin glowing. The effect was breathtaking. The ice tree came alive with light, starting from the roots and spreading upward until the entire structure glowed with soft, blue-white radiance. The light refracted through the ice, creating rainbows and patterns that danced across the plaza and the faces of the watching crowd. Then it was Rio's turn to speak. She stepped to the front of the platform, facing the assembled thousands, and began. "People of Pantora," she said, her voice amplified by hidden speakers so that everyone in the plaza could hear. "We gather tonight, as we have gathered for countless generations, to celebrate the Ice Moon Festival. We celebrate our home, this frozen world that has shaped us into who we are. We celebrate the ice that gives us strength, the cold that tests us, the endless night that teaches us to value the light when it comes." She paused, looking out at the sea of blue faces, at her people. "I have spent much of this past year away from Pantora on Coruscant, representing our world in the Galactic Senate. I have walked among beings from 1,000 different worlds, each one unique, each one with their own traditions and cultures. And what I have learned is that while we are diverse, while we come from different places and believe different things, there are certain values that unite all sentient beings. The value of family, the value of community, the value of remembering where we come from, even as we look forward to where we are going." The crowd was silent, attentive. Rio felt her confidence growing. This was why she had become a senator. This connection with people, this ability to bridge gaps and bring beings together. "The Ice Moon Festival is more than a celebration of our world," she continued. "It is a reminder of what makes us Pantoran. Our ancestors came to this frozen moon centuries ago, seeking a new home. They could have looked at the ice and the cold and the endless winter and decided it was too hard, that survival was impossible. But they didn't. They saw beauty in the ice. They saw opportunity in the cold. They built homes that became a city. They developed technologies to thrive in conditions that would kill most species. They created art and music and culture from the very elements that could have destroyed them." She gestured toward the ice tree glowing behind her. "This tree is not just a sculpture, it is a symbol. It represents growth in impossible conditions. It represents life finding a way. It represents the Pantoran spirit, which cannot be broken, cannot be diminished, no matter what challenges we face." The crowd was responding now, nodding, murmuring agreement. Rio felt the connection, that intangible thing that happened when speaker and audience became one. "As we light the ice tree tonight," she said, "as we celebrate our festival and honor our traditions, let us also remember that we are part of something larger. The galaxy is changing. Old orders are passing away. New alliances are being formed. In times like these, it is easy to retreat, to close ourselves off and focus only on our own world, our own people. But that is not the Pantoran way. We have always been explorers, always reached out to others, always sought to build bridges rather than walls." Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. "The ice that covers our world is strong, but it is also beautiful. It is transparent, allowing light to pass through. That is what we must be as a people. Strong enough to withstand any storm, but open enough to let light in. Transparent enough that others can see us as we truly are. Connected to our traditions, yes, but not trapped by them. Proud of our heritage, but not limited by it." She paused, letting her words sink in. The Ice Moon Festival reminds us that winter, no matter how long or how harsh, is not eternal. Spring always comes, light always returns, and when it does, we will be ready, ready to grow, ready to thrive, ready to take our place as not just citizens of Pantora, but citizens of the galaxy. The speech concluded with traditional words, spoken in Old Pantoran, the same words that had concluded every Ice Moon Festival opening ceremony for generations. Rio spoke them from memory, the cadence and rhythm coming naturally despite the formal language. And when she finished, the crowd erupted into applause, the sound echoing off the ice buildings and seeming to fill the entire city. The ceremony continued with traditional performances. Dancers moved across the plaza in elaborate choreography, their movements representing a cycle of seasons on Pantora. Musicians played ice flutes and crystalline chimes, creating music that seemed to come from the ice itself. Storytellers recounted ancient legends, tales of heroes who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious through cleverness and courage and the support of their community. But the highlight of the festival, the part that everyone, especially children, waited for all year, was the Grand Ice Skate. The entire festival grounds had been flooded with water weeks earlier, and the water had frozen into a perfectly smooth ice rink several hectares in size. Now, as the ceremonies concluded and night deepened, thousands of Pantorans moved onto the ice, gliding and spinning in a mass celebration of movement and grace. Rio joined them, strapping on her skates and gliding out onto the ice. She had loved skating since childhood, the feeling of speed and freedom it gave her. On the ice, rank and title didn't matter. She was just another Pantoran, moving in harmony with her people. Kashyyyk's Life Day Origins. The Rasha trees of Kashyyyk had stood for thousands of years, their massive trunks climbing kilometers into the sky, their roots delving equally deep into the planet's rich soil. These were not merely trees, but ecosystems unto themselves, hosting countless species at different levels of their vast canopies. And at the heart of the greatest forest on Kashyyyk stood the Tree of Life, oldest and largest of all the Roshar trees, sacred to the Wookiees who called this world home. Attichitchuk sat at the base of the Tree of Life, his back against its massive trunk, his eyes closed in meditation. He was old, even by Wookiee standards, his once dark fur now streaked heavily with gray and white. His son, Chewbacca, and his grandson, Lumpawaru, were somewhere high in the canopy above, preparing for the Life Day celebration that would begin at sunset. But Attichitchuk had come down to the forest floor. to the roots of the sacred tree, because this was where the oldest Wookiees came when they wanted to remember. The Tree of Life was central to Wookiee culture and spirituality in ways that non-Wookiees rarely understood. According to the oldest legends, preserved in oral tradition and passed down through countless generations, the Tree of Life had given birth to the Wookiee species itself. Whether this was literal truth or metaphor was debated even among Wookiees, but the symbolic truth was undeniable. The tree represented everything Wookiees valued: strength, endurance, family, community, the interconnection of all living things. Life Day had begun as a celebration of this tree and what it represented. In the ancient times, before Wookiees had developed advanced technology or made contact with other species, Life Day had been a solemn religious observance. Wookiee families would travel from across Kashyyyk, some journeying for weeks through the dangerous forests, to gather at the Tree of Life. They would bring offerings, share stories, remember ancestors who had died, and celebrate new life in the form of cubs born during the year. The observance had always fallen during Kashyyyk's winter season, though winter on this heavily forested world bore little resemblance to winter on ice worlds like Hoth, or even desert worlds like Tatooine. Kashyyyk's position close to its sun and its thick atmosphere meant that temperatures remained warm year-round. But there were seasonal variations. During winter, the dense cloud cover that normally kept Kashyyyk's equatorial region sweltering would thin slightly, allowing more sunlight to reach the forest floor. The massive rainfall that characterized the wet season would ease, and the rivers that flowed through the Roshar forest would calm from torrents to gentle streams. For Wookiees, winter was the season of reflection, of looking inward and remembering. The summer months were for action, for hunting and building and raising families. But winter was for stories, for teaching the young, for connecting with ancestors and traditions. Life Day embodied this perfectly. It was a pause in the busy rhythm of Wookiee life, a moment to stop and recognize what truly mattered. Atichichuk opened his eyes and looked up through the canopy. Even at the forest floor hundreds of meters below the levels where most Wookiees lived, the Tree of Life was impressive. Its trunk was so wide that 100 Wookiees standing shoulder to shoulder couldn't circle it. Its bark was ancient and gnarled, marked with countless carvings and symbols left by generations of pilgrims. Some of these carvings were recent, sharp, and clear. Others were worn smooth by time, barely visible shadows in the wood. He reached out and touched the nearest carving, running his fingers over the grooves. It was a family mark, the symbol representing his own clan, carved by his great-great-grandfather more than 200 years ago. Above it was an older mark, and above that, one older still, layer upon layer of history recorded in wood. This was another function of the Tree of Life. It was a living archive, a record of every Wookiee family that had made this pilgrimage here. In theory, if you knew where to look and could read the old symbols, you could trace any Wookiee's lineage back for millennia. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. Atichichuk didn't turn. He recognized the gate. His friend Salperin, equally old, equally white-furred, settling down beside him with a grunt that spoke of aching joints and tired muscles. "The young ones are excited," Salperin growled in Shariwook, the primary Wookiee language. Lumpy especially. This is his first life day since earning his full name. Atichichuk rumbled agreement. Lumpawaru had indeed recently completed his coming-of-age trials, the series of tests that all young Wookiees underwent to prove themselves worthy of adult names and responsibilities. The cub Lumpy had become the warrior Lumpawaru, capable of defending family and contributing to the community. It was a moment of pride for the entire clan. "Do you remember your first life day?" Salperin asked. "After you earned your name?" Atichichuk thought back, his mind reaching across the decades. "I remember standing where they stand now, high in the canopy, looking down at the tree of life and feeling small, feeling like no matter what I accomplished, I would always be just one small part of something vast and eternal. And now I feel the same, but I understand that being a small part of something vast is not diminishment. It is honor. It is purpose." They sat in comfortable silence, two old Wookiees at the roots of an ancient tree, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Around them, other Wookiees were gathering, families from across Kashyyyk, some from villages on other continents, some even from off-world. Wookiees who had left Kashyyyk but returned for this sacred day. They came in small groups and large clans, each one finding their place among the massive roots of the tree of life. The diversity of the gathering always impressed Atichichuk. Wookiees came in many colors and sizes. Some were tall and broad, warriors bred from warrior lines, their fur dark and thick. Others were smaller, their builds leaner, craftspeople and engineers whose strength lay in skill rather than muscle. Some had fur of rich browns and blacks, others tans and grays. And scattered throughout were the elders like himself, their fur gone white or silver with age. But despite this diversity, they were unified. All Wookiees, all family. Life Day was the time when clan rivalries were forgotten, when disputes were set aside, when the entire species came together to remember what connected them rather than what divided them. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, a hush fell over the gathering. The ceremony was about to begin. High above, in the upper reaches of the Tree of Life, where the branches were so massive they could support buildings, Wookiee drummers began to play. The sound rolled down through the canopy like thunder, deep bass notes that resonated in the chest and bones. Other instruments joined in. Wind chimes made from hollow wood, string instruments crafted from plant fibers, and voices. Hundreds of Wookiee voices raised in the traditional Life Day chant. The chant was in Old Shiri-Wook, a formal version of the language so ancient that many young Wookiees couldn't understand it without translation. But everyone knew the Life Day chant. It was taught to cubs from the moment they could speak, passed down with such fidelity that the version sung today was identical to the version sung 1,000 years ago. The words spoke of the cycle of life, of birth and growth and death and rebirth. They spoke of the tree and the forest, of the interconnection between all living things. They spoke of honor and family, of strength and compassion, of the balance between fierce protection of what you loved and gentle nurturing of what was fragile. The philosophy embedded in the chant was complex, touching on concepts that off-worlders often struggled to grasp. Wookiees were fierce warriors, yes, but they were also deeply spiritual, deeply connected to the natural world, and these seemingly contradictory traits were both essential to their identity. As the chant continued, Wookiees began to ascend the Tree of Life. They climbed, using the natural handholds provided by the bark, or the elaborate system of ladders and bridges that had been constructed over centuries. They climbed in single file, family units keeping together, moving with the patient strength that characterized their species. The climb was long, taking nearly an hour to reach the main platform where the ceremony would continue, but no one rushed. This was sacred time, time outside normal concerns. Atichitchuk and Salperin joined the climb, moving more slowly than the younger Wookiees, but never stopping. Age had weakened their bodies, but not their spirits, and both would have rather died than show weakness during Life Day. Around them, cubs climbed with the assistance of parents, their young strength not yet equal to the challenge of the massive tree. Adolescents climbed with the reckless speed of youth, eager to reach the top, held back by the patient hands of elders who reminded them that Life Day was not a race. The platform was vast, built from the tree's own branches, which had been carefully shaped and guided over centuries to form a natural amphitheater. At the center stood the speakers, the eldest Wookiees of the most prominent clans, those who carried the responsibility of preserving tradition and teaching it to new generations. They wore robes of red, the sacred color of Life Day, dyed using natural materials harvested from the forest. The red represented many things: blood and birth, fire and passion, the sun that gave life to all things. When everyone had assembled, when the platform was packed with Wookiees standing shoulder to shoulder, the speakers began the ceremony proper. They told the old stories, the foundational myths of Wookiee culture, the story of the first tree from which all Rosher trees descended, the story of the first Wookiee who emerged from the roots of that tree and walked into the world, the story of the first hunt and the first death and the first birth. Each story was told with full dramatic performance, the speakers using their voices and bodies to bring the ancient tales to life. Young Wookiees watched with wide eyes, hearing these stories for the first or second or fifth time, each repetition deepening their understanding. Older Wookiees listened with the patience of those who had heard these tales hundreds of times, finding new meaning in familiar words. After the stories came the remembrance. This was the most solemn part of the ceremony, the moment when the names of Wookiees who had died during the past year were spoken aloud. Each name was said clearly, given full honor, regardless of how the individual had died or what they had accomplished in life. In death, all were equal, all deserving of respect and remembrance. The names were many. Some had died in honorable combat, defending their families from predators or enemies. Some had died in accidents, the forest claiming them in a moment of inattention or bad luck. Some had died simply of old age, their bodies given out after centuries of life. And some, tragically, were cubs, children taken by disease or injury before they could reach adulthood. Each death was mourned, each name spoken with the same reverence. When the last name had been spoken, there was a long silence. Wookiees did not shy away from death or try to pretend it didn't exist. Death was part of life, part of the cycle. To remember the dead was to honor them, and to be forgotten was the only true death. Then the mood shifted. The celebration of new life began. This was the joyful counterpoint to the remembrance, the acknowledgement that while death was inevitable, so was birth and renewal. Parents brought forward cubs born during the year, presenting them to the community. Each cub was held high, shown to the assembled Wookiees, and blessed by the speakers. The blessing was simple but profound. A hope that the cub would grow strong, that they would bring honor to their family and clan, that they would find their place in the great web of life. Atichichuk watched as Chewbacca and his wife Malatobuk brought forward their second cub, born just 3 months earlier. The infant Wookiee was tiny, barely visible in Chewbacca's massive hands, its fur still the pale golden color of the very young. Mala's fur was puffed with pride, and even the usually stoic Chewbacca showed emotion, his growl softer than usual, gentle. The speaker who blessed the cub was ancient, older even than Atichitkuk, her white fur almost luminous in the fading light. She held the cub carefully, examining it with eyes that had seen generations come and go. Then she spoke the blessing, her voice cracking with age but still strong, still full of authority. May you grow tall as the trees. May you be fierce in the defense of what you love. May you be gentle with those who need your protection. May you understand that strength and compassion are not opposites, but complements. May you honor those who came before. May you prepare the way for those who will come after. May you live fully, love deeply, and when your time comes, may you die with honor. May your name be remembered. May the tree of life shelter you. May the force flow through you. May you walk always in the light. The blessing concluded, and Chewbacca took his cub back, his large hands cradling the infant with infinite care. Other parents came forward, each cub receiving the same blessing, each one welcomed into the community with the same reverence. As the ceremony continued into the night, as food was shared and stories told, as Wookiees, young and old, celebrated life in all its forms, Atichitkuk felt something he always felt during Life Day, a sense of connection that transcended the immediate moment. He was connected to his son and grandson, yes, but also to every Wookiee who had ever lived, every ancestor stretching back to the first Wookiee. And he was connected forward, too, to generations yet unborn, to cubs who would stand on this platform centuries from now and speak the same blessings, tell the same stories, honor the same traditions. The galaxy was vast and dangerous. Wookiees had faced slavery, war, near extinction. The Empire had come to Kashyyyk, had tried to break the Wookiee spirit through force and cruelty. Many Wookiees had been taken from their homes, sold to distant worlds, separated from their families and clans. It was a wound that would take generations to heal, but Life Day endured. Even Wookiees in chains, light years from Kashyyyk, would find ways to observe this sacred day. They would tell the stories to their children, keep the traditions alive, maintain the connection to home. Because Life Day was more than a ceremony. It was a promise that no matter what happened, no matter what empires rose and fell, Wookiees would endure. They would remember, though would pass on what mattered. As the twin moons of Kashyyyk rose above the canopy, casting silver light through the leaves, the celebration reached its climax. The Life Day orbs were brought forth, spherical objects made from harvested crystal that had been polished until they were perfectly transparent. Inside each orb was captured light, bioluminescent bacteria preserved in suspension. The orbs were distributed among the families, one for each clan, and as they were held high, the entire platform glowed with soft, living light. The symbolism was clear. The orbs represented the stars, the infinite possibilities of life spreading across the galaxy. They represented memory, the light of the past preserved and carried forward. They represented hope, the belief that no matter how dark things became, light would persist. Adichitchuk held his family's orb, feeling the weight of it, the smooth coolness of the crystal. Through the transparent surface, he could see the bacteria glowing, each organism tiny beyond measure, but together creating something beautiful and bright. Like Wookiees themselves, individually mortal and finite, but together part of something eternal. A clone trooper's first winner, CT-555, nicknamed Fives by his batch brothers, stood at the observation window of the Republic cruiser and watched the snow fall on the planet below. He had never seen snow before. The Kaminoans who created him had no need for weather simulations in their sterile facility, and his flash training had taught him about snow only in the abstract. Temperature below 0 degrees Celsius, frozen water crystallizing into hexagonal patterns, affects visibility, traction, weapon performance, knowledge without context, facts without feeling. But seeing it, actually witnessing snow falling from dark clouds to blanket the landscape in white, that was something entirely different. The planet was Ordo Plutonia, a remote ice world that had become contested territory between the Republic and the Separatists. The 501st Legion, Fives unit, had been deployed to establish a forward base and deny the Separatists any foothold in this sector. Standard military operation by the book, nothing that should have felt special or significant. Yet Fives couldn't tear his eyes away from the window. Something about the snow, the way it transformed the harsh landscape into something almost beautiful, called to something deep inside him. He didn't have words for what he was feeling. The Kaminoans had designed clones to be soldiers, not poets. Emotional responses were carefully balanced to produce units that could bond with squad mates and follow orders, but wouldn't be overwhelmed by fear or grief or joy. Still, Fives was feeling something, and he didn't entirely know what to do with it. First time seeing real snow? The voice came from behind him. Fives turned to find Captain Rex standing there, his armor gleaming with fresh polish, his helmet under one arm. Rex was everything Fives aspired to be. Competent, respected, a natural leader who had earned every promotion through merit rather than design. "Yes, sir," Fives admitted. "The simulations don't really capture it." Rex moved to stand beside him at the window. Together, they watched the snow fall. "No," Rex said after a moment. "They don't. I remember my first time seeing snow. Felt like the whole universe had gone quiet. Like all the noise and chaos of war just stopped for a minute." "How long ago was that?" Fives asked. 2 years? Maybe 3? Time gets weird when you're deployed. We were on some outer rim world, name I can't remember now. We'd been fighting for 3 days straight, pushing through separatist lines. Exhausted, running low on ammunition, half the squad wounded. Then it started to snow, just lightly at first, then heavier. Both sides kind of stopped by unspoken agreement. Droids can fight in any weather, but their organic commanders had sense enough to recognize a natural ceasefire when they saw one. We dug in, rested, watched the snow cover everything, made the battlefield look clean, covered all the scorch marks and the blood. For a little while, you could almost forget there was a war. Fives considered this. The idea of battle stopping for something as simple as weather seemed strange, almost impossible. But then He had only been in combat a handful of times. There was clearly much he still didn't understand. "Do you ever think about what we'll do when the war ends?" Fives asked. The question came out before he could stop it, and immediately he worried it was inappropriate. Clones didn't question their purpose. They existed to fight. That was their design, their function. But Rex didn't seem bothered by the question. "All the time," he said quietly. "I imagine a world where we don't have to fight, where we can just be, whatever that means for clones. The Kaminoans didn't design us with peacetime in mind, so I guess we'll have to figure it out as we go." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Cody, Rex's contemporary and fellow clone officer. Cody's armor was marked with the distinctive orange paint of the 212th Attack Battalion, and he moved with the efficient confidence of a soldier who had seen 100 battles and expected to see 100 more. "Weather's clearing," Cody announced. "General Skywalker wants boots on the ground within the hour. We're establishing Forward Operating Base Phoenix on the southern continent." Rex nodded acknowledgement. "Better get the men ready. Fives, with me." They left the observation deck and headed toward the staging area where the rest of the 501st was assembling. Fives put on his helmet, the HUD immediately displaying tactical information. Temperature, -15 degrees Celsius, wind speed, 30 kilometers per hour. Visibility, limited due to snow. Recommended equipment, cold weather gear, thermal packs, emergency heaters. The Republic was good at logistics. Fives had to give them that. By the time the transport ships were ready, each trooper had been issued cold weather modifications for their armor. Insulated undergarments, heating elements in the gloves and boots, breath heaters to prevent the cold air from damaging lungs. The Kaminoans might have created clones for war, but it was the Republic's supply corps that kept them alive. The descent to Orto Plutonia's surface was rough. High winds buffeted the transport, and Fives felt his stomach lurch as they dropped through turbulent air. Around him, his batch brothers and other troopers sat in stoic silence. They had all experienced rough descents before. This was just another deployment, another mission, another day in the war. But then the transport's rear doors opened as they approached the landing zone, and Fives got his first real experience of winter. The wind hit him like a physical force, so cold that even through his armor's heating systems he could feel it. Snow swirled into the transport's interior, each flake catching the light for just a moment before melting against warm metal. The landscape visible through the doors was white and gray, the horizon lost in swirling snow. "Move out!" Rex's voice over the comm cut through the howl of wind. "Establish perimeter. Stay in visual contact with your squad." Fives jumped from the transport before it had fully touched down, his boots sinking into snow that came up to his knees. The cold was intense, but not unbearable, not with the armor's systems working. He moved to his assigned position, his rifle up and ready, scanning for threats through the snow. The base location had been chosen for its strategic value. A natural valley with good sight lines surrounded by rocky outcroppings that would provide protection from the wind. Within minutes, prefabricated structures were being unloaded from the transports and assembled. Walls went up, generators were activated, sensors were deployed to create a defensive perimeter. The Republic military was nothing if not efficient at establishing temporary infrastructure. Fives and his squad, Domino Squad, were assigned to perimeter security for the first shift. This meant patrolling the outer edge of the base, watching for separatist droids or local threats. It was cold work, exhausting work, trudging through deep snow, fighting the wind, staying alert even when your body wanted nothing more than to shut down and conserve energy. But it was also when Fives started to really experience winter, beyond just the cold and the snow. He noticed how quiet everything was. The snow seemed to absorb sound, muffling even the noise of construction from the base. His own breathing inside his helmet seemed loud, the only sound in a world that had gone silent. He noticed the way the snow created patterns when it drifted against rocks, forming smooth curves and sharp angles that were oddly beautiful. He noticed how the landscape looked different every time he glanced at it, the fallen snow constantly rearranging and reshaping what was visible. His batch brother Echo trudged beside him, equally quiet. Finally, Echo spoke over their private comm channel. "You ever wonder what it would be like to see this place without the war? Just a planet covered in snow, no bases, no weapons, no objectives?" "All the time," Fives admitted, echoing Rex's earlier words. "I try to imagine a place that exists just to be beautiful, not strategic. I don't know if I really can, though. Everything I know about the galaxy is filtered through tactics and objectives." "Maybe that's what peace will be like," Echo mused. "Learning to see things as they are, not as resources or threats. Learning to appreciate something just because it exists." They completed their patrol in silence, lost in thoughts neither was trained to have. Back at the base, as their shift ended and they entered the warmth of the barracks module, Fives pulled off his helmet and found himself smiling. Not because anything particularly good had happened, but because he had experienced something new. His first winter. His first real sense that the galaxy was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than the Kaminoans had prepared him for. Over the days that followed, as forward operating Base Phoenix became established and the 501st settled into the routine of occupation, Fives found himself volunteering for perimeter patrols more often than was strictly necessary. His brothers noticed, but didn't comment, understanding in the way that clones understood each other. They all had their quirks, their small rebellions against programming, their ways of asserting individuality in a system designed to make them interchangeable. During one patrol, Fives encountered something unexpected. A creature native to Ortoplutonia emerged from the snow. It was massive, covered in white fur with intelligent eyes that studied him with what seemed like curiosity rather than aggression. Fives raised his weapon instinctively, but something made him pause. The creature wasn't attacking, wasn't threatening. It was just there, existing in its habitat, going about its business. Slowly, Fives lowered his weapon. The creature watched him for another moment, then turned and lumbered away, disappearing into the swirling snow. The whole encounter lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it stuck with Fives. He had been programmed to see threats, to categorize everything as hostile or friendly, combat or support. But this creature was neither. It was just life, continuing independent of the war, indifferent to the grand conflicts that consumed the galaxy. That night, in the barracks, Fives lay in his bunk and thought about the creature. He thought about the snow. He thought about Echo's words about learning to see things as they were rather than as resources. and he thought about Rex's hope for what clones might become when the war ended. For the first time in his short life, Fives allowed himself to imagine a future. Not the abstract concept of after the war that the Republic leadership sometimes mentioned, but an actual concrete vision of himself existing in peacetime. Maybe on a planet with seasons where he could experience winter and spring and summer and fall. Maybe with his brothers still together, still a squad, but without the combat. Maybe doing what? He didn't know. The Kaminoans hadn't given him a template for that, but maybe that was okay. Maybe figuring it out was part of what made a being real, what turned a designed soldier into an actual person with hopes and dreams and desires. The snow had shown him that there was a universe beyond combat. Now, he just had to survive long enough to experience it. Naboo's Festival of Light. The Mandalorian winter hunt. The snows had come early to Concordia that year, blanketing the moon's forests in white, before the Mandalorian clans had finished their harvest. This was seen as an omen, though whether good or bad depended on which elder you asked. The older Mandalorians, those who remembered the ancient ways before the new Mandalorians had tried to make them into something they weren't, said early snow meant a hard winter, but strong hunters. The younger generation, influenced by the pacifism that had briefly gripped Mandalorian culture, simply saw it as weather, another challenge to be overcome through technology and preparation. Rantor fell somewhere in the middle. He was 16 years old, young by Mandalorian standards, but old enough to participate in his first winter hunt. This was the rite of passage that would determine whether he was accepted as a full member of Clan Tor, whether he would be permitted to wear Beskar armor and bear the clan's mark. For Mandalorians, armor was not merely protection. It was identity, history, honor. To earn your armor was to become truly Mandalorian, and the winter hunt was how that earning happened. He stood now in the clan's forge, watching the armorer work. She was an older woman, her face hidden behind the traditional helmet she never removed. The armorer held a unique position in Mandalorian society, neither warrior nor leader, but something more fundamental. She was the keeper of traditions, the one who transformed raw Beskar into the armor that defined a Mandalorian. Her forge was considered sacred space, and to enter without permission was a grave insult. But Ran had been summoned here, along with the 5 other young Mandalorians who would participate in this year's winter hunt. They stood in a semicircle, all wearing the simple training armor that marked them as not yet adults, watching as the armorer worked with molten Beskar. The forge itself was a marvel. Mandalorians had been working with Beskar for thousands of years, and their techniques for smelting and shaping the incredibly durable metal were closely guarded secrets. The forge burned at temperatures high enough to melt Beskar, but not so hot that it destroyed the metal's unique crystalline structure. This balance required precise control, generations of accumulated knowledge, and an almost instinctive understanding of how the metal responded to heat and hammer. The armorer thrust a piece of raw Beskar into the flames, her movements practiced and efficient. She had forged armor for 3 generations of Clan Tor, had shaped the metal that protected Rand's father and grandfather and great-grandfather. She knew every technique, every secret, every trick of the trade. And more importantly, she understood the spiritual significance of what she did. Forging armor wasn't just metalwork. It was a sacred act, imbuing metal with meaning, transforming raw ore into something that would carry a warrior through life, and, if they were lucky, to an honorable death. "The winter hunt," the armorer said, her voice resonating from behind her helmet, "is older than the Mandalorian Wars, older than the Republic itself. It dates back to when our people first came to this moon, when survival meant understanding the land and learning to take from it only what was needed." She pulled the beskar from the flames, now glowing a bright orange. With measured strikes, she began to shape it on her anvil, each impact sending sparks flying. In those days, winters were the time of testing. Food was scarce. The weak died. Only the strong, the clever, the adaptable survived. The winter hunt emerged as a way to identify those who had what it took to endure. Another batch of Mandalorian youths listened silently. They all knew the history, had heard these stories since childhood, but hearing them here in the forge on the eve of their own hunt made them real in a way they never had been before. "You will be taken to the northern forests," the armorer continued, working the beskar as she spoke. "Each of you will be given a survival pack. Basic rations for 3 days, a blade, a fire starter. No blasters, no advanced technology. You will survive for a week using only your skills and what the forest provides. And you will each take a trophy, a predator native to Concordia, hunted and killed using traditional methods." Rand felt his pulse quicken. He had trained for this his entire life, had practiced tracking, hunting, survival skills. But practice was different from reality. The northern forests of Concordia were dangerous even in summer. In winter, they became lethal. Temperature could drop to -20°C. Predators grew desperate and aggressive as prey became scarce. One wrong move, one moment of inattention, and you died. "This is not a competition," the armorer said, her hammer ringing against the beskar in steady rhythm. "You are not racing against each other. The forest is your opponent, and survival is your victory. Help each other if you can. Mandalorians are strongest when we work together, but understand that each of you must take your own trophy. That is non-negotiable. Without it, you cannot return." The piece of beskar was taking shape now, forming into what looked like a pauldron, the shoulder armor that was often the first piece a young Mandalorian received. The armorer worked with absolute confidence, never hesitating, never second-guessing. She had done this thousands of times, and muscle memory guided her as much as conscious thought. "The winter hunt teaches many lessons," she continued. "Patience. The best hunters know when to wait. Respect for your prey. Every creature you hunt could be you in different circumstances. All life struggles to survive, and we honor that struggle even as we end it. Humility. The forest does not care about your training or your lineage. It will kill you as readily as it kills any other creature, and only skill and luck will save you." She plunged the shaped beskar into water, and steam erupted with a hiss. "And it teaches you about death. If you are to be a Mandalorian, if you are to wear armor and carry weapons, you must understand what it means to kill. Not in abstract, not in training simulations. You must look into the eyes of a living creature and choose to end its life. That choice changes you, and only by making that choice consciously, deliberately, with full understanding of what you're doing, can you become the kind of warrior who kills when necessary, but never carelessly. The lesson concluded, and the 6 young Mandalorians were dismissed to prepare for the hunt. Rand returned to his family's dwelling, a structure carved partially into the hillside for protection from the wind. His father, Baltan, was waiting for him, examining the survival pack that Rand would carry. "I did the winter hunt when I was 15, Baltan said, not looking up from his inspection of the gear. "Coldest winter in 50 years. 3 of us went into the forest. Only 2 came back." Rand had heard this story before, but he let his father tell it again. Part of Mandalorian culture was the oral tradition, the passing down of stories from generation to generation. Each telling was slightly different, emphasis shifting based on what lesson the teller wanted to impart. "Derek was his name," Baltan continued. "Good kid, fast, strong, maybe a little too confident. We were 4 days in, and he decided to go after a dire cat on his own. Those things are apex predators for a reason. By the time we found him, there wasn't much left to bring home. We carried what remained back to the clan for proper funeral rites, but his armor was never forged. His place in the clan went unfilled. That's the risk you accept when you go on the hunt. Not everyone comes back." "I'll come back," Rand said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Maybe," his father said, and there was no comfort in his voice, no reassurance. Mandalorians did not coddle their young. The galaxy was harsh, and pretending otherwise helped no one. "But if you don't, know that you will be remembered with honor. That matters. Not success or failure, not whether you live or die, but whether you face the challenge with courage. That's what makes a Mandalorian." The next morning, well before dawn, the 6 candidates gathered at the edge of the northern forest. The armorer was there, along with several clan elders who would oversee the hunt. No parents were present. This was a journey each young Mandalorian had to begin alone, supported by tradition, but not by family. The armorer spoke the traditional words, the same words that had been spoken before every winter hunt for thousands of years. She spoke them in Mandoa, the language of the Mandalorian people, words that resonated with history and significance. "Ke Gais, Ke Jurkadir, Ke Gais, Ke Jurkadir. Stay alive, stay mobile, stay alert, stay awake." Then, without ceremony, the 6 candidates entered the forest, spreading out in different directions. There was no starting gun, no countdown. The hunt simply began. Rand walked for hours through snow that came up to his knees in some places. The forest was dense, ancient trees whose branches blocked most of the light even during the day. His breath misted in the cold air, and his fingers were already going numb despite the thermal gloves he wore. He was rationing his body heat, using Mandalorian techniques passed down through generations. Stay moving, but not so fast you sweat. Sweating in this cold was a death sentence. The moisture would freeze against your skin, leaching away heat, causing hypothermia. He found a suitable campsite just before dark, a natural overhang in the rocks that would provide shelter from wind and some protection from the snow. He cleared the snow from the ground, laid out his sleeping roll, and built a small fire using branches he collected during his hike. The fire was tiny, barely enough to warm his hands, but it was sufficient. Mandalorians learned early to live with discomfort. As darkness fell, Rand ate a small portion of his rations and settled in to wait out the night. This was when the forest truly came alive. He could hear sounds in the darkness, The howl of wind through trees, the snap of branches breaking under the weight of snow, and other sounds less identifiable, movements in the underbrush, calls that might have been animal or might have been something else. He kept his blade close, though he knew it would be poor defense against the really dangerous predators of Concordia, the dire cats, the ice wolves, the shriek hawks that hunted in packs. All of them were faster and stronger than any human. If something decided to attack him tonight in the dark, away from the fire, his survival would depend on luck more than skill. But nothing attacked. The night passed slowly, and eventually the sky began to lighten. Ran allowed himself to doze, knowing he needed rest but unable to truly sleep. This was another Mandalorian skill, the ability to rest while remaining alert, to let the body recover without surrendering awareness. The hunt itself began on the third day. Ran had spent the first 2 days simply surviving, learning the patterns of the forest, identifying potential prey. He had seen several animals that would have made acceptable trophies. A snow hare, large and strong. A winter fox, cunning and quick. But he knew what trophy he really wanted, the one that would earn not just acceptance but respect, a dire cat. He found the tracks on the morning of day 3, large paw prints in the snow, widely spaced, indicating a creature moving at speed. Fresh tracks, made within the last few hours. The dire cat was hunting, which meant it was vulnerable. Even apex predators were less alert when they were focused on prey. Rand followed the tracks, moving slowly, silently. This was the culmination of years of training. Tracking was as much art as science, requiring an ability to read the landscape, to think like the prey, to predict rather than simply follow. The tracks led him deeper into the forest, to areas where the trees grew so close together that the snow had barely penetrated. The ground here was frozen dirt, hard as stone, making silent movement difficult. He found the dire cat in a small clearing, crouched over a kill. The cat was massive, easily twice Rand's weight, with silver-gray fur that made it nearly invisible against the snow. Its tail lashed as it fed, and Rand could hear the sound of crunching bone. For a moment, he simply watched. The armorer's words echoed in his mind, respect for your prey. This was a magnificent creature, perfectly adapted to its environment, a survivor like Rand himself. In another life, they might have been allies rather than enemies. But this was the test, and only one of them would walk away. Rand had one advantage, the element of surprise. The dire cat was downwind and focused on its meal. If he acted now quickly and decisively, he might take it before it even knew he was there. But something made him hesitate. Where was the honor in killing from ambush? Where was the test? He stepped into the clearing, deliberately making noise. The dire cat's head snapped up, eyes locking onto Rand. For a long moment, predator and prey, though which was suddenly unclear, regarded each other. Then the cat charged. Rand moved on pure instinct, sidestepping at the last possible second. The cat's claws raked his shoulder, shredding fabric but not finding flesh. He struck back with its blade, a glancing blow that drew blood but didn't slow the creature. They circled each other, both wary now, both understanding that this fight could go either way. The battle lasted maybe 10 minutes, though it felt like hours. The cat was faster and stronger, but Rand was smarter and had better endurance. He used his environment, forcing the cat to navigate around trees, disrupting its attacks. He feinted and dodged, wearing it down, waiting for the opening he needed. When it came, Rand barely saw it. The cat stumbled just slightly, its hind leg catching on a root hidden beneath the snow. That split second was all Rand needed. He lunged forward, blade extended, and found the killing spot just behind the foreleg, driving through fur and muscle to find the heart. The dire cat collapsed, its momentum carrying it forward to knock Rand off his feet. They fell together into the snow, predator and prey intertwined. Rand could feel the cat's breath on his face, smell its musk, feel its heat. Then the light faded from those golden eyes, and the great body went still. Rand lay there for a moment, catching his breath, hardly believing he was alive. He had killed a dire cat, actually killed one in single combat, using only a blade. The reality of it was overwhelming. This magnificent creature, this perfect predator, had ceased to exist because of him. He understood now what the armorer had meant about the choice to kill, about how it changed you. He spent an hour preparing the trophy, carefully skinning the cat and preserving the pelt, the meat he left for scavengers. Take only what you need, respect what you take. These were Mandalorian values as old as the culture itself. As he worked, he found himself speaking to the dead cat, thanking it for the honor of the hunt, apologizing for what necessity had required. The journey back to the clan took 2 days. Rand moved more slowly now, exhausted from the hunt, burdened with his trophy. But he felt different. Stronger, yes, but also humbler. He had faced death and survived, but only barely. The thin line between life and death had never been clearer. When he emerged from the forest, the clan was waiting. The armorer stood at the front, and Rand approached her, laying the dire cat pelt at her feet. She examined it carefully, checking the quality of the skin, the cleanness of the cuts. Finally, she nodded. "You have done well, Rand Tor. You went into the forest as a child and have returned as a warrior. Your trophy is worthy. Your armor will be forged." The celebration that followed lasted through the night. The clan gathered in the main hall, a massive structure carved into the mountain itself. Food was plentiful and stories were shared. Each returning hunter told the tale of their hunt, and the elders offered commentary and wisdom. Rand's dire cat hunt was particularly well received, and several older Mandalorians approached him to share their own dire cat stories, welcoming him into that exclusive group of hunters who had faced the apex predator and lived. But the true culmination came the next day, when Rand stood once more in the forge. The armorer had worked through the night, and now she held the first piece of his armor, a helmet forged from Beskar that had been in Clan Tor for generations. The metal had been melted down and reforged countless times, each generation adding their essence to it, creating continuity that stretched back centuries. "This armor is your inheritance and your responsibility," the armorer said, presenting the helmet. "It connects you to every Mandalorian who came before and to all who will come after. Wear it with honor, maintain it with care, and when your time comes, pass it on to the next generation." Rand took the helmet with both hands, feeling its weight, its solidity. The surface was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting his face back at him. For now it was plain, unmarked except for the T-shaped visor that was the universal symbol of Mandalorian kind. But over time, he would personalize it, add marks that reflected his own journey, his own story. He put the helmet on, and the world changed. The interior was lined with materials that distributed weight evenly, making the heavy Beskar feel almost weightless. The visor had built-in sensors that enhanced his vision, providing targeting data and environmental information. But more than the physical changes, there was something psychological. With the helmet on, Rand felt different. He felt like a Mandalorian. "This is the way," the armorer said, speaking the ancient words that summed up everything Mandalorian philosophy stood for. "This is the way," Rand repeated, and the assembled clan echoed the phrase. "This is the way." Coruscant's artificial winter level 5E127 of Coruscant's habitation zones was, by the standards of the galactic capital, considered mid-level, high enough to avoid the worst of the pollution and darkness that characterized the underworld, low enough that rent remained affordable for ordinary working beings. It was here that Saria Keen made her modest living as a textile merchant, selling fabrics imported from across the galaxy to the endless stream of beings who called Coruscant home. Saria had been born on Alderaan, a world of natural beauty where seasons changed according to planetary cycles and winter meant snow falling on green mountains. She had come to Coruscant 15 years ago, seeking opportunity, and had found success by most measures. Her business was profitable, her apartment was comfortable, and she had built a network of friends among the various merchants and traders of level 5127. But she missed the seasons, missed the rhythms of natural weather, missed knowing what time of year it was by looking at the sky rather than consulting a calendar. Coruscant had weather, technically. It rained, sometimes. The endless city generated its own microclimate, with moisture accumulating in certain areas and precipitating out in brief, violent downpours. But there were no seasons, not really. The planet-wide city maintained a constant, carefully regulated temperature. The buildings trapped heat. The billions of beings generated waste warmth, and the energy required to keep the city functioning created a thermal signature visible from orbit. Even at the poles, where theories suggested it should be cold, the sprawling cityscape radiated enough heat to prevent ice from forming. But humans and many other species were evolved to expect seasons. Their bodies and minds anticipated changes in temperature, light, and weather that marked the passage of time and the cycle of years. Without these cues, many beings on Coruscant experienced a kind of temporal disorientation, a sense that time was passing but not really moving, that days blurred together into an undifferentiated stream. The Senate had, in its wisdom, attempted to address this issue. Throughout Coruscant's habitation levels, public spaces were designated as seasonal zones, where atmospheric processes would create conditions approximating the seasons of various homeworlds. Near the date that would be considered winter on many worlds, these zones would drop their temperatures to near freezing, would generate artificial snow from moisture in the air, would even modify the artificial lighting to create the shorter days and longer nights that characterized winter. Saria stood now in one such seasonal zone, a public plaza on level 5127 that had been transformed for the winter celebration. Artificial snow fell from nozzles hidden in the level ceiling, hundreds of meters above. The snow was real water ice, indistinguishable from natural snow except in the precision of its generation. It fell in steady streams accumulating on the plaza floor, on the decorative sculptures, on the shoulders of beings who stood beneath it with faces upturned, remembering home worlds and childhoods. The plaza had been decorated by various community groups, each one bringing their own interpretation of winter to the shared space. There were ice sculptures, carved by artisans from Hoth and other ice worlds, depicting everything from abstract geometric shapes to detailed representations of animals and people. There were lights, billions of them, creating patterns and displays that would have been impossible on worlds without advanced technology. There were vendors selling foods associated with winter on various worlds, hot beverages, warm pastries, roasted meats, all the comfort foods that cold climate species had developed over millennia. But what struck Saria most was how many beings were here. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands packed into this single plaza, all seeking connection to something primal and fundamental. The diversity was staggering. Humans from dozens of different worlds, each with their own winter traditions. Twi'leks, whose homeworld of Ryloth had extreme temperature variations between day and night, but not really seasons as most beings understood them, here to experience something their species had never naturally evolved with. Rhodians, Ithorians, Bothans, species from across the galaxy, all gathered in this artificial winter, all seeking the same thing: connection, memory, a sense that life was more than just work and survival. Saria found herself near a small group of Alderaanians, her own people, who had gathered around a glowing brazier. They were singing, their voices harmonizing in traditional Alderaanian winter songs. Saria knew these songs. She had sung them as a child, during real winters on her homeworld, when her family would gather in the great halls of their estate and celebrate the longest night. One of the Alderaanians noticed her standing nearby and gestured for her to join them. Saria hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. The group opened their circle to include her, and soon she was singing along, the words coming back without conscious effort. They sang about snow and ice, about the return of light, about loved ones separated by distance but connected by memory. They sang in High Alderaanian, the formal version of their language used mainly for ceremonies and songs, and Saria felt tears on her cheeks as the words brought back memories she had thought she'd left behind when she came to Coruscant. When the songs ended, the group lingered, sharing stories about Alderaan, about what they missed, about what they remembered. Saria learned that several of them were, like her, first-generation immigrants from Alderaan. Others were second or even third generation, born on Coruscant, but maintaining connection to their ancestral home through tradition and stories. They talked about planning a journey back to Alderaan, a group pilgrimage to see their homeworld again, or in the case of the younger ones, to see it for the first time. "It's important to remember," one of the older Alderaanians said. "A woman named Vela, who had come to Coruscant 50 years ago, especially on a world like this, where everything is artificial, where nothing grows naturally, where even the weather is manufactured. We need these celebrations. We need these reminders that we come from places where life existed in harmony with natural cycles, where beings lived according to the rhythms of their planets rather than the demands of bureaucracy and commerce." Saria found herself not in agreement. She had never quite put it into words, but Vela was right. This was why she came to these seasonal zones, why she participated in these celebrations, even though they were manufactured. They connected her to something real, something that existed before cities covered worlds, before technology made nature optional. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the center of the plaza. A group of Jedi younglings had arrived, accompanied by their teachers, come to experience their first artificial winter. Saria watched as the children, none of them older than 10 standard years, encountered the snow. Many of them came from tropical worlds or space stations where they had never experienced cold weather. Their reactions were a mixture of delight and confusion. One child, a human boy with the facial tattoos indicating he was from Kesh, reached out to catch snowflakes on his palm, watching in wonder as they melted against his warm skin. Another, a Twi'lek girl, tasted the snow, her face scrunching up at the unexpected coldness. A third, a young Wookiee, roared with excitement and began rolling in the accumulated snow, creating a scene that drew laughs from the watching crowd. The Jedi teachers, Saria noticed, were equally absorbed. Though they maintained a calm demeanor expected of Jedi, she could see the small smiles, the subtle relaxation in their postures. Even beings trained to maintain emotional control could appreciate simple beauty, could enjoy a moment of wonder removed from the conflicts and complications of galactic politics. As the evening progressed, the artificial winter intensified. The temperature dropped further, approaching actual freezing. The snowfall increased, creating near whiteout conditions in parts of the plaza. And the lighting changed, dimming to create the illusion of night falling, though, of course, on Coruscant's interior levels, there was no real day or night, just the constant glow of artificial illumination. Saria found a bench near the edge of the plaza and sat, content to watch. She observed families building small snow sculptures, parents teaching children skills that their own parents had taught them on homeworlds half a galaxy away. She watched couples walking hand in hand, seeking romance in this manufactured winter, finding it despite, or perhaps because of its artificiality. She watched elderly beings sitting alone, their faces showing some mixture of happiness and sadness, remembering winters past, remembering people who were no longer here to share this one. Near her, a street musician had set up, playing what looked like a modified Alderaanian ice harp. The instrument produced ethereal tones, each note hanging in the cold air before slowly fading. The musician was improvising, creating melodies that seemed to capture something essential about winter, melancholy but not sad, cold but not harsh, beautiful in a way that only temporary things can be beautiful. Saria closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. For just a moment, she could pretend she was back on Alderaan, back in the mountains where she had grown up, back in a time before she had come to Coruscant seeking fortune. She could smell the pine trees, feel the bite of real wind rather than air processing, hear the silence that existed only in places far from cities. But when she opened her eyes, she was still on level 5127, surrounded by billions of beings, in the heart of the galactic capital. And that was okay. This artificial winter wasn't the same as what she remembered from Alderaan, but it was something. It was an attempt, however imperfect, to maintain connection to the natural world, to remember that beings weren't meant to live entirely divorced from the planets that had shaped them. The celebration continued late into the night. Eventually, the snow stopped falling, and heating elements hidden throughout the plaza activated, slowly raising the temperature back to comfortable levels. The snow began to melt, turning to slush, and then to water that drained away through carefully designed systems. By morning, the plaza would be dry again, all evidence of winter removed, the space returned to its normal function as just another part of Coruscant's endless cityscape. But the memory would remain. The beings who had gathered here would carry this night with them, would remember it during the long, seasonless days that stretched ahead. And that memory would sustain them, would remind them that they were more than just economic units or political entities. They were beings with histories, with connections to worlds and cultures and traditions that predated the Republic itself. They were capable of creating beauty even in the most artificial environments, of finding meaning in manufactured experiences, of maintaining hope and connection even on a world that seemed designed to strip such things away. As Saria walked back to her apartment, she passed through levels that showed no sign of the seasonal celebration. Here, life continued as it always did on Coruscant. Beings working through the night, vendors selling their wares, speeders rushing past on invisible traffic lanes. The great machine of the galactic capital never stopped, never slowed, never acknowledged anything as frivolous as seasons or celebrations. But tonight, for a few hours, a small corner of that machine had paused. A pocket of winter had existed in the heart of endless summer, and that, Saria thought, was worth celebrating. The Jedi Temple's quiet reflection. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant stood as a monument to 1,000 generations of peacekeepers and philosophers. Its 5 spires reached toward the sky, visible from thousands of levels below, a constant reminder of the Jedi's presence and their role as guardians of the Republic. Within those walls, thousands of Jedi trained, meditated, and prepared for their duties across the galaxy. But even the Jedi, beings trained from infancy to control emotion and transcend normal attachments, recognize the value of observing certain cycles and traditions. The winter solstice, calculated according to Coruscant's original solar calendar before the planet became entirely city, was one such tradition. It was not celebrated with festivals or gifts, not in the way most cultures mark the season. Instead, it was a day of quiet reflection, a time when the normal activities of the temple slowed, and Jedi of all ranks were encouraged to turn inward, to examine themselves and their connection to the Force. Master Shak Ti walked through the temple's meditation gardens as the designated winter solstice approached. These gardens were marvels of engineering and botany, maintained in perfect condition despite being hundreds of meters above street level, enclosed within the temple structure. The plants here came from across the galaxy, each one selected not for beauty, but for its resonance with the Force. Some were ancient, thousands of years old, their roots digging deep into carefully maintained soil that had been transported from their homeworlds. Others were young, recently planted, part of the temple's ongoing cultivation of Force-sensitive flora. The gardens were particularly important during the winter solstice tradition. On this day, Jedi would spend hours here, sitting among the plants, opening themselves to the Force, seeking guidance and insight. The practice dated back to the temple's founding, when the first Jedi on Coruscant had recognized that even on a world increasingly covered by city, pockets of natural life were essential for proper meditation in connection to the living force. Shakti found her customary meditation spot, a flat stone beside a small water feature where liquid flowed in a continuous loop, the sound providing focus without distraction. She settled into position, her mantras perfectly balanced, her breathing slowing to the measured rhythm that indicated deep meditation. Around her, other Jedi were doing the same, each finding their own space, their own approach to the solstice reflection. The practice was not mandatory. Nothing in the Jedi Order was truly mandatory beyond adherence to the code. But tradition held power, especially for an organization as old as the Jedi. Young Padawans learned by watching their masters observe these traditions. Knights participated because they understood the value. Masters taught the practices because they had learned them from their own masters. And so the cycle continued, knowledge passing from generation to generation in an unbroken chain, stretching back millennia. Shakti opened herself to the Force, letting go of the thoughts and concerns that normally occupied her mind. The war with the Separatists, her responsibilities as a Jedi general, the political maneuvering in the Senate, all of it faded. What remained was simply awareness, a sense of being present in this moment, in this place, connected to the living force that flowed through all things. The force was particularly strong here in the gardens. The combination of life, both plant and Jedi, created a resonance that made meditation easier, that amplified connection. She could feel the other Jedi around her, each one a bright point in the Force, their individual presences combining into something greater. She could feel the plants, their simpler but no less real connection to the Force, their slow growth and patient endurance. She could feel very faintly the countless beings living on Coruscant's thousands of levels, billions of individual sparks of life, creating a vast tapestry of existence. Time became meaningless. Shakti might have been sitting for minutes or hours. In deep meditation, such distinctions were irrelevant. What mattered was the quality of connection, the depth of insight, the understanding that emerged from silence and stillness. Gradually, she became aware of a presence approaching. She opened her eyes to find a young Padawan standing nearby, a human girl perhaps 12 years old, looking uncertain. The girl wore the traditional Padawan braid, and her lightsaber hung at her belt, the weapon still new enough that she touched it occasionally for reassurance. "Master T," the girl said quietly, "I apologize for disturbing your meditation. I'm not sure I understand what I'm supposed to be doing." Shakti gestured for the girl to sit. "What is your name, young one?" "Sarah Volan, Master. I've been a Padawan for 6 months now. My master suggested I come to the gardens for the solstice reflection, but I don't really know what that means." "Tell me," Shakti said gently, "what do you know about winter?" The girl considered. "On most worlds, it's the coldest season. Days are short, nights are long, plants stop growing, some animals hibernate. It's the time of year when survival is hardest." A good technical description, Shakti agreed, but winter is also symbolic. Across countless cultures, winter represents many things. Endings and death, yes, but also rest and preparation. The seed that lies dormant in frozen ground, gathering strength for spring. The darkness that makes us appreciate light. The cold that makes us value warmth. Winter teaches us that dormancy is not death, that sometimes the greatest growth happens invisibly, beneath the surface, in silence and darkness. So the solstice reflection is about being dormant? Sarah asked, clearly still uncertain. In a sense, it is about turning inward, examining ourselves without the distraction of external activity. As Jedi, we spend most of our time in action. Training, missions, combat, diplomacy, service, all important, all necessary. But action without reflection can lead us astray. We must regularly pause, look inward, assess whether our actions align with our principles, whether we are still walking the path we chose or have drifted without noticing. Shakti gestured at the garden around them. These plants understand cycles in ways we sometimes forget. They grow vigorously in spring and summer, producing leaves and flowers and fruit. But when winter comes, they stop. They conserve energy. They focus on survival rather than growth. And when conditions are right again, they emerge stronger than before. The solstice reflection is our winter, a time to stop growing outward and instead tend to our roots. The explanation seemed to resonate with the young Padawan. She settled into a meditation pose, closing her eyes, her breathing becoming measured. Shakti watched for a moment, then returned to her own meditation, pleased that another generation was learning these ancient practices. The day progressed. The artificial lighting in the gardens slowly dimmed, mimicking the short days of winter. More Jedi arrived, finding their spots, settling into meditation. Among them were beings of dozens of species, each bringing their own cultural understanding of winter and solstice, each finding their own meaning in the practice. Master Yoda appeared eventually, moving through the garden with the slow, measured steps of extreme age. He was older than anyone else in the temple, older perhaps than anyone alive in the galaxy. He had seen hundreds of winters, both literal and metaphorical. He had witnessed the Jedi Order at its heights and its low points. He had trained countless students, seen them grow into powerful Jedi, watched some fall to darkness or die in service. He carried history in ways few others could. He found his usual spot, a raised root from one of the ancient trees, and settled onto it with a grunt. For a long moment, he simply sat, his eyes closed, his long ears drooping in relaxation. Then he spoke, his voice carrying through the garden despite its quietness. "Strong, the darkness grows," he said. "Feel it, you all do, yes? The war, the fear, the anger spreading across the galaxy. Easy to be caught up in it, easy to forget who we are, what we stand for." Jedi throughout the garden had paused their meditations to listen. When Yoda spoke in this context, it was teaching, and all were expected to attend. "Winter, not just a season is," Yoda continued, "a metaphor also for times of trial, of darkness, of cold. In winter, all seems dead, but beneath the surface, life persists, waiting, preparing. Patient we must be. Remember who we are. We must. Guardians of peace, not soldiers. Keepers of wisdom, not warriors. In the darkest times, the light of hope we must maintain." He opened his eyes, surveying the assembled Jedi. "Meditate on this, I ask you. In your own winter, in your own darkness, what light do you carry? What hope do you maintain? When all seems lost, what remains?" The questions hung in the air, profound and challenging. These were not easy questions, not simple koans with clever answers. These were the fundamental questions that every Jedi had to answer for themselves, repeatedly, throughout their lives. Shakti returned to her meditation, Yoda's words echoing in her mind. What light did she carry? She had always served as a warrior when necessary, using her skills to protect the Republic. But was that her light, or simply what circumstances had demanded? When the war ended, if it ended, who would she be? The meditation deepened. Time passed. The garden grew darker as the artificial day ended and artificial night began. Some Jedi departed, their meditations complete, but many remained. The solstice was a time of endurance as well as reflection, a test of patience and commitment. Young Sarah sat nearby, still deep in her own meditation. Shakti observed her with the Force, noting the girl's struggles. Meditation did not come easily to most youngling and Padawans. Their minds were active, restless, full of thoughts and worries and excitement. Learning to quiet that mental noise, to achieve true stillness, could take years of practice. But Sarah was trying, genuinely trying, and that effort was what mattered. Not success or failure, not achieving perfect meditation, but the sincere attempt to turn inward, to examine oneself honestly, that willingness to look at oneself without flinching, to acknowledge both strengths and weaknesses. That was the foundation of wisdom. As the longest night deepened, as Coruscant's billions slept or worked or pursued their own concerns, the Jedi in the meditation gardens continued their quiet reflection. They sat among ancient plants beneath artificial stars, seeking connection to something older than the Republic, older than civilization itself. They reached through the Force toward understanding, toward peace, toward the light that persisted even in the darkest winter. Tales from the Outer Rim cantinas. The cantina on Ord Mantell had no name, or if it did, no one remembered what it was. Locals simply called it the cantina, as if it were the only one on the entire planet, which it definitely wasn't. But in this particular quarter of Ord Mantell's capital, with its reputation for smugglers and bounty hunters and beings running from something, everyone knew which cantina you meant when you said the cantina. Jasuk sat at the bar, nursing a drink that was more ice than alcohol at this point, watching the crowd. He was a Rhodian, green-skinned and antenna-eyed, and he made his living as a mechanic working on the various ships that came through Ord Mantell's busy spaceport. It was honest work mostly, though he didn't ask too many questions about cargo or modifications that seemed designed to fool custom scanners. You learned quickly, on worlds like Ord Mantell, that survival depended on minding your own business. The cantina was busier than usual tonight. A freak storm had rolled in, dropping the temperature to near freezing and dumping snow on a planet that normally saw snow maybe once every few years. Beings who would normally be out on the streets or in their own dwellings had taken refuge here, seeking the warmth of the cantina's heating systems and the distraction of alcohol and company. Jasuk found it amusing in a grim sort of way. Many of these beings were hardened smugglers, criminals who thought nothing of shooting their way out of trouble or double-crossing partners for profit. But throw a little cold weather at them, and suddenly they were huddled around heating units like refugees. Mind if I sit? A human woman gestured to the empty stool beside Jasuk. She was middle-aged by human standards, with gray in hair pulled back in a practical braid, and the weathered appearance of someone who spent a lot of time in ships and on harsh worlds. Jasuk shrugged. It's a free galaxy. Well, sort of. The woman signaled the bartender and ordered something hot. When it arrived, she wrapped both hands around the mug, clearly seeking its warmth as much as its contents. Name's Vix, she said. Freelance pilot. You? Jasuk. I fix ships. An honest trade? Vic said with a slight smile that suggested she understood exactly how loosely the word honest applied in this context. Been here long? 5 years, give or take. You? Just passing through. Was supposed to leave yesterday, but my contact didn't show, and now this storm has everything grounded, so I guess I'm stuck here until it passes. They fell into the comfortable silence of two beings who understood that sometimes company didn't require constant conversation. Around them, the cantina was alive with noise. Conversations in a dozen languages, some friendly, some heated. Music from a battered sound system in the corner, the clatter of glasses and bottles, the occasional shout or laugh. At a table in the corner, a group of Weekwe were playing a card game, arguing loudly over who had cheated and how. Near the door, a Trandoshan sat alone, his reptilian eyes scanning the crowd with the predatory focus of a hunter. At the bar, a few seats down from Jazuk, a Twi'lek woman was telling an animated story to anyone who would listen, her leku twitching with emphasis. "It's strange," Vic said eventually. "All these different beings from all across the galaxy, and we end up in places like this. Anonymous, temporary, not really building anything, just passing through." "You sound philosophical," Jazuk observed. "The cold makes me think," Vic said. "Back on my homeworld, winter was a time for family. We'd gather in the main hall, light the fires, tell stories. My father was a merchant, always traveling, but he made sure to be home for the winter solstice. Said it was important to stop moving long enough to remember who you were and where you came from." "What happened?" Jazuk asked, sensing there was more to the story. "War happened. My homeworld got caught between the Republic and the Separatists. Both sides claimed they were protecting us, but mostly they just destroyed everything we'd built. My family's gone. The hall where we gathered is rubble. So now I'm here, in a cantina on Ord Mantell, drinking overpriced caf and talking to a stranger." Jazuk didn't respond immediately. What could you say to that? The war had displaced millions, destroyed thousands of worlds. Everyone had lost something or someone. After a moment, he raised his glass. "To family, then, lost but not forgotten." Vix raised her own mug, and they drank in silence. Around them, the cantina continued its chaotic business, beings coming and going, deals being made, grudges being settled, connections being formed and broken with equal speed. A commotion near the door drew their attention. A group of refugees had entered, a mixed group of humans and aliens, all of them looking cold and desperate. They weren't the usual cantina crowd. These were civilians, families, carrying belongings in makeshift bags, clearly displaced by something. The bartender, a surly basilisk, moved to throw them out. This was not a place for families, for children, for beings who couldn't pay. But before he could reach them, an unexpected voice spoke up. "They can sit at my table." It was the Trandoshan, the solitary hunter. Everyone in the cantina turned to stare. Trandoshans were not known for their compassion or generosity. They were predators, hunters who earned their living, tracking and capturing or killing sentient beings. But this Trandoshan stood and gestured the refugees to the empty seats at his table. "And bring them food," he said to the bartender. "Hot food. Put it on my tab." The bartender hesitated, clearly torn between his usual policy and the unexpected development. Finally, he shrugged and went to prepare the food. The refugees, looking equally confused, cautiously approached the Trandoshan's table. "Why are you helping us?" One of them, a human woman holding a small child, asked the question everyone was thinking. The Trandoshan was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough, the basic words clearly not coming easily to his reptilian vocal cords. "Because on my homeworld, there is a tradition. During the cold season, we leave our doors open. Any hunter who needs shelter, any being who needs warmth, they can enter. It is honor, old honor. I am far from my world, but the tradition, it stays here." He tapped his chest with one clawed hand. The woman nodded slowly, accepting this explanation. The refugees settled at the table, and when the food arrived, they ate with the desperation of beings who hadn't had a hot meal in days. The moment created a shift in the cantina's atmosphere. It was subtle, but Jazuk felt it. Beings who normally wouldn't give each other the time of day were suddenly aware of each other as more than just potential threats or marks. The Weequay at their card table invited a passing Sullustan to join their game. The Twi'lek storyteller's audience grew as beings moved closer to listen. Even the bartender seemed slightly less surly, pouring drinks with something approaching generosity. "I haven't seen anything like this in years," Vix murmured. "People actually being decent to each other. What happened?" "The cold," Jazuk said. "Sometimes it takes something uncomfortable, something that reminds us we're all just flesh and blood trying to survive, to break down the walls we build. Tomorrow, when the storm passes and the temperature rises, everyone will go back to their corners. But tonight, for a few hours, we remember that we're all in this together." The night wore on. The storm outside intensified, wind howling and snow accumulating in drifts against the cantina's walls. But inside, a strange warmth had developed that had nothing to do with the heating systems. Stories were shared, drinks were bought for strangers, and for a brief time, the Outer Rim Cantina became something more than just a way station for beings with nowhere else to go. An old spacer, his face creased with age and his hands scarred from decades of hard work, stood eventually and began to sing. The song was in a language Jazuk didn't recognize, but the melody was haunting, speaking of loneliness and distance and the ache of being far from home. Others joined in, even though they didn't know the words, humming along or adding harmony. The music filled the cantina, and for those few minutes, everyone present was connected by something fundamental and human and universal. When the song ended, there was a moment of silence. Then someone else began a different song from a different world in a different language. And that one too was picked up and carried by voices that had no business harmonizing, but did anyway. The refugee child, the one being held by her mother at the Trandoshan's table, had fallen asleep. Her small body relaxed in the warmth and safety of the moment. The Trandoshan looked at her, and something in his reptilian features softened. He reached into his pack and pulled out a worn blanket, draping it over the sleeping child with surprising gentleness. Jazuk watched all of this and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the grand hope of galactic peace or great victories, but the small, stubborn hope that comes from witnessing ordinary acts of kindness. The hope that says, no matter how dark things get, no matter how far we fall, there's still something worth saving in sentient beings. "You know," Vic said quietly, "maybe my father was right. Maybe winter is important. Maybe we need these times that force us to stop moving, to huddle together for warmth, to remember that we're all just trying to survive this cold, cruel galaxy. Maybe, Jasuk agreed, though I could do without the actual cold part. They laughed, and the sound felt good, felt real. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the nameless cantina on Ord Mantell, surrounded by strangers who had become something more than strangers, warmth persisted. The Force awakens in winter. On the planet Dagobah, in a swamp far from any civilized world, an old Jedi master sat in meditation. The concept of winter was almost meaningless here. Dagobah's climate remained constant year-round, hot and humid, the swamp steaming under thick cloud cover that rarely broke. But the forest itself had seasons, cycles that transcended planetary weather, and those who were sufficiently attuned could sense them. Yoda opened his eyes and looked around his simple dwelling. Humble it was, built from mud and the natural materials of the swamp, protected by his mastery of the Force, but otherwise unremarkable. He had lived here for decades now in self-imposed exile, waiting for the moment when he would be needed again, watching, sensing, maintaining his connection to the Force while the galaxy descended into darkness under Imperial rule. The Force, Yoda had learned over his 900-year life, was not constant. It flowed and ebbed like tides, responding to the actions and emotions of countless sentient beings across the galaxy. There were times when the light side was strong, when hope and compassion and justice seemed to prevail. And there were times when the dark side surged, when fear and anger and hatred spread like a disease. This was such a time. The Empire's grip on the galaxy had brought a kind of winter to the Force itself, a cold darkness that chilled even the most distant corners of space. The Jedi were nearly extinct, their temples destroyed, their knowledge scattered or lost. The few who survived lived hiding, unable to openly practice their beliefs, afraid that any use of the Force might draw the attention of Vader or the Emperor's inquisitors. But even in this darkest winter, Yoda could sense something. Small lights scattered across the galaxy, Force-sensitive beings who had survived the Purge or had been born after it. They didn't know what they were, didn't understand the power within them, but they existed, potential Jedi, waiting for someone to find them, to train them, to help them become what they were meant to be. One such light had recently appeared on Yoda's awareness. A boy on Tatooine, strong in the Force, living with his uncle on a moisture farm, dreaming of a life beyond the desert that trapped him. Yoda had sensed him before, years ago, when Obi-Wan Kenobi had taken the infant into hiding, but now the boy was older, entering the age when Force abilities would begin manifested more strongly. Soon, very soon, his destiny would begin to unfold. Yoda settled deeper into meditation, reaching out through the Force. He touched the boy's presence lightly, not enough to alert him or draw attention, just enough to sense his potential. Strong, very strong, but also troubled, impatient, impulsive. Reminded of another, the boy did. Someone Yoda had trained decades ago. Someone who had fallen to the dark side and become the Empire's greatest weapon. Yoda murmured to himself. A test, this will be, of whether learn from mistakes we can, of whether save this one we will, where we failed before. He withdrew his awareness, allowing the Force to settle back into its natural flow. Around him, the swamp continued its endless cycle. Life feeding on death, death providing nutrients for new life, the circle unbroken and eternal. Dagobah was a good place for meditation on such matters. Here, the natural balance of the force was visible in every aspect of the ecosystem. Predator and prey, growth and decay, light and darkness, all existing in perfect equilibrium. Yoda rose from his meditation spot and shuffled to the entrance of his dwelling. Outside, the swamp was alive with sounds, the buzz of insects, the splash of creatures moving through water, the calls of flying things in the canopy above. He had learned to love this place, despite or perhaps because of its challenges. Living here required constant awareness, constant connection to the living force. One moment of inattention, and the swamp could kill you. But that very danger had kept him sharp, had prevented his skills from deteriorating during the long years of exile. He thought about winter, about darkness, about waiting. The Jedi Order had been at its height during spring, during the light times when they had numbered in the thousands and been respected throughout the galaxy. But that spring had made them complacent, had allowed them to forget that darkness was always waiting, always hungry for a chance to surge back. The fall of the Order was in many ways a consequence of that complacency. Now came winter and winter's lessons, endurance, patience, the understanding that survival sometimes meant going dormant, appearing dead while maintaining life at the deepest levels. The seed buried in frozen ground, waiting for spring. That was the Jedi now, scattered and hidden but not extinct, waiting for the moment when they could emerge again and spring would come. Yoda knew this with the certainty of someone who had lived through countless cycles. The Empire seemed invincible now, its power absolute, but all empires fell eventually. All darkness, no matter how deep, eventually gave way to light. The question was not whether spring would come, but whether there would be any Jedi left to see it when it did. That was why the boy on Tatooine mattered, why every Force-sensitive child who had survived mattered. They were seeds, potential, the promise of renewal. If they could be protected, trained, guided toward the light, they would become the foundation of a new Jedi Order. Different from the old one, hopefully wiser, but still dedicated to the core principles of peace and justice and service. Yoda sensed another presence approaching through the swamp. This one was familiar, expected. Qui-Gon Jinn, or what remained of him after death. The Jedi Master had discovered a technique thought impossible, maintaining consciousness after death, becoming one with the Force while retaining individual identity. He had been Yoda's teacher in this, guiding him through the process of learning to commune with the Force in ways the living Jedi had never imagined. Master Yoda. Qui-Gon's voice came not through air but directly through the Force. You sense him, the boy. Yes, Yoda replied. Strong, he is, perhaps too strong. Remember another strong boy I do? Remember where strength without wisdom led? Anakin was my failure, Qui-Gon said, pain evident even in his Force presence. I saw his potential but missed his fear. I thought I could train him, thought I could prove the Council wrong. My arrogance contributed to his fall. All our failure it was, Yoda corrected gently. The entire Order, so focused on rules and tradition, we were, that recognized real people with real struggles, we did not. Learn from that, we must. This new student, if Obi-Wan does his duty and trains him, must be seen as a person first, a Jedi second. His doubts, his fears, his attachments, denied they cannot be. Guided, instead, understood. Made into strength, rather than weakness. Can Obi-Wan do that? Qui-Gon asked. He is a good man, a skilled Jedi, but he was trained in the old ways, the same ways that failed Anakin. Change he must, Yoda said, as must we all. Winter teaches this lesson. What worked in spring and summer, worthless in winter is. New approaches, new wisdom, new flexibility, winter demands. The Jedi of the past, gone they are. The Jedi of the future, different they must be. They communed in silence for a while, two Jedi masters separated by death but connected by the Force, contemplating the future of an order that might not survive to see that future. Finally, Qui-Gon's presence began to fade, his ability to maintain manifestation limited by the energy required. Before he withdrew completely, he spoke once more. There is another Skywalker, a daughter hidden even more carefully than the sun. She will have a role to play as well, perhaps an even more important one. Yes, Yoda agreed. Sensed her, I have, but her time not yet come. Patient we must be, watchful, ready to guide when the moment is right, but not before. Too much interference is harmful as too little can be. Qui-Gon's presence faded entirely, leaving Yoda alone once more in his swamp dwelling. The old Jedi Master settled back into meditation, opening himself fully to the Force, feeling its currents and eddies, sensing the great patterns that ordinary beings could never perceive. Winter would end. Spring would come. But first, winter must be endured. The darkness must be lived through, survived, learned from. Only by fully experiencing winter could one truly appreciate spring. Only by enduring darkness could one truly value light. And so Yoda waited, as he had waited for years, as he would wait for however many years remained. He maintained his vigil, kept his connection to the Force strong, prepared himself to guide the next generation of Jedi when they emerged. He was old, impossibly old, and he would not live to see the full spring that was coming. But he could help plant the seeds. He could ensure that when he finally passed from this life into the Force, he left behind students who would carry on the work, who would nurture those seeds into strong trees. The Force flowed through him and around him, and he was at peace. In the heart of winter, in the depths of darkness, the ancient Jedi Master maintained his faith in the eternal cycle. Spring would come, light would return, the Jedi would endure. This was the true meaning of winter, the lesson it offered to all who would listen. Darkness was real, cold was real, death was real, but they were not permanent. They were part of a cycle. And on the other side of winter, spring was already waiting, inevitable and unstoppable as the turning of seasons across the galaxy. As we reach the end of our journey through these winter tales from across the galaxy, let yourself sink deeper into rest. These stories of cold nights and warm hearts, of darkness that makes light shine brighter, remind us that even in the harshest conditions, life finds ways to persist, to celebrate, to create meaning. From Hoth's ancient ice fields to Korriban's sacred tombs, from Tatooine's frozen nights to Pandora's ice festivals, from Kashyyyk's Life Day traditions to the lessons learned in a clone trooper's first winter, from Naboo's celebrations of light to Mandalorian trials of endurance, from Coruscant's artificial seasons to wisdom preserved in Jedi meditation, from fellowship found in Outer Rim cantinas to the patient waiting of those who guard the future. All of these stories are connected by winter's fundamental truths. Winter teaches us to endure, to find warmth in connection with others, to maintain hope even when darkness seems overwhelming, to remember that nothing, not even the longest night, lasts forever. Spring always returns. Light always finds its way back. Life always persists. Let these tales carry you into peaceful sleep, knowing that across the galaxy, in 1,000 forms and fashions, beings celebrate the same truths, that we are stronger together than apart. That tradition connects us to those who came before and those who will come after. That even small acts of kindness can create warmth in the coldest circumstances. That the Force, in all its manifestations, flows through everything, connecting all life in an endless, eternal cycle. May you rest well, and may your dreams be filled with starlight and the promise of spring to come. And if you've enjoyed these tales from the Star Wars galaxy, consider subscribing to the channel for more lore to fall asleep to. Share these stories with others who might find comfort in them, and most of all, carry forward into your waking life the lessons winter teaches. That patience, endurance, connection, and hope are not just concepts, but practices we can choose every day. Good night, and may the Force be